Imagine stepping outside on a bitterly cold winter night centuries ago. No central heating, no electric blankets, no insulated coats. Just raw cold that crept into your bones and lingered in the air of every drafty home. Yet people survived, often with remarkable, unusual, and sometimes downright strange methods to keep warm. From sleeping on beds of hay to drinking hot spiced wine, from animal hides to communal fires, history is filled with inventive strategies that reveal just how determined people were to find comfort in the face of winter as bite. Welcome to History for Sleep, where we tell long, calming stories from the past designed to help you drift into rest. Tonight, we'll explore the curious and sometimes surprising ways people across different centuries and cultures endured the coldest months of the year. You'll hear about medieval families huddled together in one bed, Romans heating stones to slip under their covers, and even ancient rituals that blurred the line between superstition and survival. If you've ever wondered how people got through icy winters without the comforts we take for granted, this journey will reveal not only their creativity, but also their resilience. And as you listen, allow the gentle rhythm of history to ease you into sleep, carrying you along through time as the past quietly unfolds. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you'll always have relaxing history stories waiting for you whenever you need them. And in the comments, let us know what topics you'd like to hear next, or share when you usually listen, whether it's to fall asleep, to relax after a long day, or just to enjoy history in a calm, soothing way. So settle in, make yourself comfortable, and perhaps even tuck yourself under a blanket. Together, let's wander into the frosty nights of the past and discover the strange, resourceful, and sometimes charming ways people tried to stay warm in winter. For as long as humans have endured winter, fire has been at the center of survival. It was more than a tool, more than a source of light. It was the very heartbeat of life during the coldest months. Imagine stepping into a dwelling, centuries ago, where the air outside is biting and sharp. The door creaks open, and immediately the smell of smoke greets you. A single fire flickers in the center of the room, casting a dim orange glow. The flames are small compared to the cold pressing in from the outside, but for those gathered around it, this was warmth, comfort, and safety. Before chimneys and modern stoves, fires were often built on open hearths directly in the middle of the living space. The smoke would rise, not through a flue or a neatly designed pipe, but straight upward, filling the rafters before seeping out through a hole in the roof or through gaps in the thatch. This meant that many homes were perpetually smoky, their beams blackened over the years, and their occupants' eyes accustomed to watering. Yet, despite the discomfort, that fire was life itself. Without it, there was no cooking, no light at night, and certainly no heat in the depths of winter. In ancient times, fire had a spiritual as well as a practical presence. For the Romans, the hearth was sacred, watched over by the goddess Vesta. In Greek households, the hearth of Hestia was treated with reverence. To let a fire go out in winter was more than an inconvenience. It could feel like a spiritual failure, a loss of divine favor. Families took care to keep embers smoldering, sometimes banking them carefully under ashes so they would last until morning. Rekindling a fire from scratch was not only difficult, but also considered unlucky in many traditions. The fire drew families together. In peasant cottages across medieval Europe, the single hearth was often the only source of heat. Children would play near it, women would spin wool or prepare food beside it, and men might sit with their tools, mending what was needed for the season. Stories were told around the flames, shadows dancing against the walls. At night, before heading to bed, families would sit close to the warmth, stretching out their hands, hoping to carry a little of that heat with them into the cold straw mattresses waiting nearby. But fire was also a dangerous companion. Sparks leaping from the hearth could set straw, thatch, or wooden beams ablaze in an instant. Winter might mean warmth, but it also meant risk. Entire villages could be reduced to ash by a single accident, especially when winds carried sparks from one house to another. For this reason, tending the fire was a responsibility taken seriously. Children were taught early to respect the flames, to understand both its gift and its threat. In grander halls and castles, fire took on a different character. Instead of a small hearth in the center of a single room, the great hall would often hold a massive fire pit or an oversized hearth along one wall. Smoke might still fill the room, staining the tapestries and irritating the eyes, but the scale was larger, the woodpile higher, and the flames more dramatic. In these spaces, warmth was not only survival, it was a display of wealth. To burn great logs all through the night was a sign that the lord of the house had resources to spare. Guests could feel both physically warmed and socially impressed. Across cultures, variations in how fires were kept reveal different strategies for surviving winter. In Scandinavia, longhouses held fires that could burn continuously, sometimes with raised platforms along the sides where people could sleep a little closer to the warmth. In colder regions of Asia, such as parts of China and Korea, people developed heated floors, an innovation where fire beneath or near the home would channel warmth through stone or clay. These were early, brilliant attempts to make fire not just a single spot in the room, but a presence that spread throughout the living space. Yet for most people, the hearth was modest. A few logs or bundles of sticks, a little pile of embers glowing faintly in the dark, carefully nursed through long nights. The fire had to be fed constantly. In some places, it was common for families to assign someone, often the youngest or oldest in the house, the duty of rising in the night to add fuel, ensuring the flames would still be alive come morning. Waking up to a cold hearth was a dreadful experience, the air biting and sharp, breath visible in the room. Relighting the fire was not only inconvenient, but often difficult if kindling was scarce or damp. The presence of fire shaped how homes were built. Central hearths required open spaces, while side hearths encouraged smaller, more compartmentalized rooms. Chimneys, which spread widely in Europe in the late Middle Ages, changed everything, allowing smoke to rise and escape efficiently, making rooms less suffocating and walls less blackened. But before chimneys became common, many generations simply lived with smoke, their clothing and hair steeped in its smell. Fire was also deeply tied to the rhythms of the seasons. In summer, fires were small, sometimes only for cooking. In winter, they became vast, as large as the household could sustain. Wood gathering was a year-round task, but especially crucial in the months leading up to winter. Families that did not prepare enough could find themselves shivering, rationing wood with care, choosing between cooking food and keeping a room warm. The sound of an axe in the forest, the piling of logs, and the careful stacking of kindling were all as much a part of winter preparation as preserving food or mending clothing. There is something timeless about the image of people gathered around a fire. Whether it was a small peasant family in a medieval hut or a noble household in a great hall, the principle was the same. The fire was the heart. Around it, stories were told, meals were shared, warmth was given. In many ways, it was less about the flames themselves and more about the gathering they inspired. Even now, with modern heating systems, fireplaces retain their charm. People are drawn to the sight of flames, the crackle of wood, the dance of light and shadow. Perhaps it is an echo of that ancient truth, that in winter, fire was not only survival, but also comfort, memory, and community. For those in the past, huddled close to a hearth in a world without central heating, it was everything the difference between life and death, cold and warmth, darkness and light. When we think of winter today, many of us picture padded jackets, thermal fabrics, or waterproof boots. But for centuries before modern textiles, people relied on something much simpler, and often more creative layers upon layers of whatever they could find. clothing was not just about fashion or modesty in winter. It was survival itself. Imagine a medieval villager waking on a frosty morning. The breath hangs in the air, visible even indoors. Before stepping outside to tend animals or chop wood, layers were essential. The first layer might be linen, cool against the skin, but vital as a barrier to wick away sweat and keep the body dry. Dampness, after all, was a greater enemy in cold weather than the cold itself. Over that went wool, of fabric prized for its warmth and durability. Wool could hold heat even when damp, a miracle material compared to anything else widely available. Wool tunics, cloaks, and hose formed the backbone of winter wardrobes across Europe. Peasants might only own one or two garments, often patched and repatched, but they wore them constantly, adding extra layers of whatever scraps they had. In colder regions, furs became treasures. Fox, rabbit, sheep, and even squirrel pelts were stitched into linings for cloaks or used as trim around hoods and sleeves. For those who could afford it, ermine and sable were the most luxurious choices, flaunted by nobles not only for their warmth, but also as status symbols. The idea of layering was instinctive. Long before thermal underwear, people learned that multiple thin layers could trap more heat than one heavy garment. In Japan, for example, during the Heian period, court nobles wore multiple robes of silk, each one carefully chosen not only for warmth, but also for aesthetic effect, with colors and patterns revealed as the layers overlapped. While this was as much about elegance as survival, it also created insulation against winter's chill. In the Middle East and Central Asia, layered clothing was equally important, but adapted to different climates. Nomadic peoples of the steppes wore heavy felt coats, often made from compressed wool, layered over tunics and trousers. Felt, though simple in appearance, was incredibly effective against biting winds. Combined with fur hats and boots, it allowed riders to survive and travel in conditions that would have frozen the unprepared. Head coverings were another essential. Much of the body's warmth escapes through the head, and so hoods, caps, and scarves were widespread. In medieval Europe, peasants might wear simple woolen hoods that could be pulled up or draped over the shoulders. Nobles, meanwhile, often had hoods lined with fur or velvet, rich in both comfort and appearance. Across Asia, fur hats with ear flaps were common, and in the Middle East, layered turbans provided both warmth and a measure of protection against cold winds. Footwear was perhaps the most difficult part of staying warm. Before waterproof boots and rubber soles, people often stuffed shoes with straw or moss to create insulation. In colder climates, fur-lined boots were essential, but not always affordable. Some poorer households simply wrapped their feet in cloth or animal skins, tying them tight with leather thongs. In Russia and Eastern Europe, traditional footwear included Valenki-thick felt boots that were still common well into modern times. These boots were not waterproof, but paired with overshoes or simply worn in dry snow, they were excellent insulators. For those with means, clothing became almost an art of warmth. Wealthy households might have entire wardrobes dedicated to winter attire. Fur-trimmed cloaks, woolen gowns, thick gloves, and elaborate hats. In contrast, the poor often had little more than a single cloak or a patched tunic, worn day and night, sometimes even in bed. The difference between classes was stark. To own fur was not just to be warm, it was to proclaim one's social standing. The materials themselves carried symbolic meaning. Wool was practical, but fur suggested luxury. Linen was humble, yet essential. Leather provided durability, particularly for shoes and gloves. Each piece of clothing was not just protection against the cold, but a reflection of a person's place in the world. In some cases, laws even dictated what people could wear. Sumptuary laws restricted certain furs and fabrics to nobility, leaving peasants to rely on simpler, rougher garments. But warmth often required ingenuity. In Scandinavia, fishermen lined their clothing with oiled cloth or animal fat to block icy winds and water spray. In mountainous regions, travelers carried cloaks so large they could be wrapped around the entire body, creating a portable shelter against snowstorms. And in many cultures, people believed certain colors or patterns carried protective powers, choosing them not just for warmth, but also for luck during the harshest months. At night, clothing remained part of the strategy for survival. While we might think of night clothes as soft and loose, many people simply slept in their day garments, adding extra layers if possible. In colder households, where blankets were scarce, wearing every available piece of clothing to bed was not uncommon. Children especially were often bundled tightly, sometimes so well that they could barely move beneath their layers. Gloves and mittens also tell a story of adaptation. In medieval Europe, mittens were far more common than gloves, since keeping the fingers together preserved more warmth. In colder regions, mittens were lined with fur or made entirely from felt. Gloves, with separated fingers, were usually reserved for tasks requiring dexterity. Even then, warmth was sacrificed for function. In parts of the Arctic, indigenous peoples made mittens from caribou hide, sometimes with removable liners that could be dried and replaced, an early example of clever winter technology. The smell of winter clothing was another constant of life. Wool carried its own scent, and combined with smoke from fires, sweat from work, and oils or fats used for waterproofing, garments could become heavy and pungent. Washing was infrequent in winter, both because water was scarce and because drying clothes in the cold was difficult. Instead, people aired clothing by the fire, letting smoke act as a kind of preservative. For many, the scent of smoke clinging to garments was simply the smell of winter itself. Yet despite the hardships, winter clothing also inspired creativity. Embroidery, colorful dyes, and decorative trims found their way even onto practical garments. In times when days were short and nights were long, clothing became one of the few visible ways to express individuality and beauty, even amid the necessity of survival. Brightly colored scarves, patterned cloaks, or carefully stitched mittens brought a touch of warmth that was as emotional as it was physical. Ultimately, clothing was a dialogue between necessity and culture. Every layer represented adaptation to climate, to social class, to available resources. The poorest made do with patched wool and scraps. The wealthiest draped themselves in silks and furs, and in between, countless families relied on ingenuity to create warmth where little existed. When we imagine the past in winter, we often picture snow-covered landscapes, frozen rivers, and cold stone buildings. But within those scenes are the people themselves, wrapped in layers, cloaks pulled tight, hands buried in mittens, breath clouding the air. Each garment was part of the ongoing story of how humanity endured the cold, not with modern fabrics or heated coats, but with resourcefulness, patience, and the timeless instinct to wrap ourselves against the world outside. When the coldest nights of winter pressed against the walls of homes in centuries past, one of the most effective, if simple, strategies for warmth was sharing a bed. Today, we often think of beds as private spaces, something reserved for a spouse or, perhaps, a child seeking comfort. But for much of history, beds were communal, crowded, and filled with more than just family. In winter, warmth was too precious to waste, and bodies became as important as blankets. Imagine a small peasant cottage in medieval Europe. The roof is low, the walls drafty, and the only source of heat is the faint glow of the hearth, already dimmed by night. Straw mattresses are laid out on the floor or on simple wooden frames, covered with wool blankets if the family was fortunate, or animal skins if they were not. Into that bed went not one or two, but often an entire household. Parents, children, sometimes grandparents, all pressed together under the same cover, a huddle of warmth in the darkness. This was not seen as unusual. In fact, it was expected. The human body produces heat, and in a time when homes lacked insulation or heating systems, sharing body warmth was not simply comforting, it was survival. Children were placed in the middle, shielded by adults on either side. Elders, who often struggled most with the cold, might also be given the warmest spots. In many households, bed sharing was as much about protection as it was about warmth. And it wasn't only families who shared beds. Travelers staying at inns often found themselves paired with strangers. In a typical medieval inn, private rooms were rare, and a single bed might be assigned to 2 or more guests who had never met. There are countless references in diaries, plays, and literature to the awkwardness of bed sharing with strangers. But it was an accepted part of life. The logic was simple. A bed could only be spared if shared, and in the bitter cold of winter, few complained too loudly about the extra warmth. The practice of bundling is another fascinating tradition tied to shared beds. In Northern Europe and colonial America, bundling allowed courting couples to sleep in the same bed, fully clothed, sometimes even with a board or barrier placed between them. While it carried social and romantic implications, at its heart it was also practical. In cold winters, there were only so many beds and only so much space. 2 young people lying together under the same cover was more efficient than wasting precious warmth. In wealthier households, bed sharing still occurred, though with different dynamics. Servants often slept together in shared quarters, lined with straw pallets or simple wooden frames. In castles or manor houses, large 4-poster beds draped with heavy curtains created enclosed spaces that trapped heat more effectively than open frames. Within those curtained beds, lords and ladies sometimes shared space with attendants or children, not always out of necessity, but because the warmth of extra bodies was still appreciated. The use of bed curtains deserves special mention. Heavy fabric draped around the bed created a microclimate, holding in the breath and warmth of those within. The air might become stuffy, but it was undeniably warmer than the icy room beyond. For noble families, these curtains were often richly decorated, embroidered with patterns, or lined with furs. For common families, they might be little more than patched cloth, yet they served the same purpose, keeping the winter out as best they could. Bed sharing also reinforced bonds within families. In cultures where multiple generations lived together, grandparents told stories in bed to grandchildren, weaving memories into the fabric of long winter nights. Siblings whispered to one another in the dark, while parents reassured their children with their steady presence beside them. The cold may have been harsh, but the closeness of family warmth provided a sense of comfort that went beyond temperature. Yet, as with all things, there were complications. Bed sharing could spread illness easily, and in times of plague or influenza, the same practice that kept people warm could also hasten the spread of disease. Records from the 17th and 18th centuries note entire families falling ill together, sometimes within days, because of the close quarters of shared beds. Still, for most, the risk was outweighed by the need to survive bitterly cold nights. Not all arrangements were equal, of course. Class differences again played a role. A wealthy merchant might have a feather mattress and thick blankets, warmed by bed warmers filled with hot coals. His family could share the bed comfortably in relative luxury. Meanwhile, a poor farming household might have only straw and a single tattered cloak to cover them, every inch of space in the bed filled with shivering children and parents. The principle was the same, sharing warmth, but the experience varied widely. Bed-sharing traditions also reflected cultural values. In some Native American communities, longhouses were used where entire extended families slept near one another, often with shared blankets of animal hide. The closeness fostered a sense of community and protection, especially in harsh northern climates. In nomadic yurts across Central Asia, family members slept side by side on layered carpets, their combined warmth radiating outward, while fires in the center of the yurt helped ease the chill. In monasteries, the practice of bed sharing sometimes extended to monks, though with strict rules of modesty. In nunneries, sisters often shared sleeping quarters. though not always the same bed. Yet even in religious contexts, the principle of conserving warmth through proximity was understood. Humanity's need to endure the cold did not bow to ideals of privacy. Children's lullabies, folk tales, and bedtime rituals often revolved around the shared bed. The space was not merely for rest, it was for teaching, for storytelling, for prayer. Parents spoke of ancestors, of myths, or recited lessons in the dim glow of a candle. In this way, bed sharing became more than a practical solution. It was a cultural experience, one that wove together warmth, kinship, and memory. Over time, as housing improved and heating methods evolved, the practice of bed sharing shifted. Privacy began to carry greater value, and personal beds became symbols of status. Yet even into the 19th century, many working-class families and cities still shared beds in crowded tenements. Travelers continued to share with strangers in boarding houses and inns. And even today, echoes of the practice remain. Parents bringing their children into their bed on a cold night, siblings snuggling close at sleepovers, or families gathering on one couch under a shared blanket. Looking back, bed sharing reminds us of how different daily life once was. What we now think of as private and individual was, for most of history, communal and shared. In the depths of winter, warmth was too valuable to reserve for one person alone. It belonged to everyone who could fit under the blanket, on the straw, or inside the curtained frame of the bed. It is easy to imagine the scene: the quiet of a winter night, the creak of timbers, the whisper of wind outside. Inside, a family breathes in rhythm, their warmth pooling together in the darkness. For them, bed sharing was not strange, not embarrassing, not awkward. It was natural, necessary, and deeply human. In those moments, pressed shoulder to shoulder, they not only endured the cold, but built a closeness that echoed through generations. When the frost of winter crept into homes, one of the simplest and most ingenious ways people found relief was through objects heated by firestones. Bricks, pans, and even iron tools turned into vessels of warmth. Before the age of hot water bottles or electric blankets, households relied on these practical solutions, passed down through generations, to make the cold a little more bearable. Picture the end of a long winter's day. A family sits around the fading fire, their faces lit by the last glow of the coals. They know that once the flames die, the chill of the night will press in heavily. To carry the fire with them into the bed, they turn to stones or bricks, heating them directly in the embers. Once warmed, these objects could be carefully wrapped in cloth, slipped under blankets, or placed near feet, radiating comfort long after the fire itself had gone quiet. Heated stones were among the earliest methods. Smooth river stones held heat well, and once warmed by fire, could be carried to bed as natural radiators. They were often tucked into the foot of a bed, where cold seemed most relentless. Wrapped in cloth to prevent burns, they released their warmth slowly through the night. For those with little wood to spare, this method was invaluable. A single stone could be reheated over and over, requiring less fuel than keeping a fire burning until dawn. Bricks were another common tool. In medieval Europe, households often placed bricks directly into the hearth until they glowed with stored heat. These bricks, once carefully removed with tongs, were wrapped in rags or blankets and carried to bed. The warmth seeped outward, sometimes lasting hours. In wealthier homes, servants might be tasked with heating bricks for their masters, ensuring that beds were pre-warmed before the family retired for the night. This small luxury, slipping into a bed that was already warm, was something peasants could scarcely imagine, but for nobles it became a cherished comfort. Iron pans represented an even more sophisticated adaptation. Known as bed warmers, these devices appeared widely in Europe during the late Middle Ages and Renaissance. A long-handled metal pan, often with a perforated lid, was filled with glowing coals from the fire. The pan was then slid between the sheets, moved back and forth to spread the warmth. The perforations allowed heat to escape while keeping the coals safely contained. Yet even these came with dangers. Careless use could scorch linens or even set a bed ablaze. Stories survive of fires started when embers spilled, turning a tool of comfort into a hazard. Still, for centuries, bed warmers remained popular, especially in colder regions like England, France, and the Low Countries. Different cultures adapted the same principle in their own ways. In Japan, families used ceramic or metal containers known as hibachi and kairo. These small portable braziers held glowing charcoal and were placed under tables or near beds, often combined with blankets to trap heat. The kotatsu, a low wooden table with a heat source beneath and a blanket draped over, became an enduring symbol of Japanese winter life. Even today, modern versions of the kotatsu continue to warm households. In China, similar braziers were common, and some regions developed heated brick platforms called kong. These long raised surfaces were built into homes and connected to stoves or fireplaces, allowing warmth from fire to travel through the bricks. Families slept on the heated platform, the stone slowly releasing warmth throughout the night. This ingenious system combined architecture and technology, demonstrating how deeply people adapted their homes to carry heat beyond the fire itself. In colder parts of Europe, especially Scandinavia, soapstone became a favored material for holding heat. Dense and slow to cool, soapstone could be placed near fires, then carried into sleeping areas. Some stoves were even built with soapstone linings, so that after the fire had gone out, the stone continued to radiate gentle warmth for hours or even days. Families would keep smaller soapstone pieces, wrapped in cloth, as personal bed warmers. These objects were prized, passed down, and carefully maintained small treasures in the long fight against winter's cold. The experience of slipping into bed with a heated stone or brick was transformative. Instead of the shock of icy sheets, there was a glow of comfort, a small oasis of warmth spreading through the straw mattress or feather bed. Children might compete for the warmest spots, while adults carefully shifted the warmer throughout the night, moving it from feet to hands to chest as the heat gradually faded. In a world without electricity, such a simple tool could turn a shivering night into something almost cozy. Yet, as with many winter strategies, class differences were stark. Wealthy households often had multiple bed warmers, sometimes made of polished brass or copper, decorated with engravings. These were as much symbols of refinement as they were tools of comfort. Servants would prepare them nightly, ensuring every bed in the house was properly heated. In contrast, peasants relied on whatever they had: rough stones from a riverbank, bricks salvaged from building sites, or even clay pots filled with embers. The warmth they provided was the same, but the elegance was worlds apart. There were also regional quirks. In rural Scotland and Ireland, people sometimes used turf or peat embers, carried into small iron pots and placed beneath bedding. In colder alpine villages, heated tiles were occasionally used, placed at the foot of shared beds. In Russia, families often turned to the masonry stove, a massive structure that not only cooked food, but also radiated heat. Some stoves even had sleeping platforms built directly above them, where family members could lie in warmth, as the stones below retained the day's fire. Over time, as technology advanced, heated stones and pans gradually gave way to hot water bottles. By the 19th century, rubber and metal bottles filled with hot water became common in Europe and America, safer and easier to manage than glowing coals or fragile ceramics. Yet the principle was the same: carrying a piece of the fire into bed, a portable flame transformed into a gentle glow. It is striking to consider how something as simple as a stone or brick could embody both necessity and comfort. For the poorest households, it was a survival tool. For wealthier ones, it was a luxury ritual, a way to end the day with ease. But in both cases, the warmth they provided was treasured. On long winter nights, when snow pressed against windows and frost crept along walls. That small glow of heat became a reminder of the ingenuity with which humans faced the cold. Even now, there is something nostalgic in the thought. To slip into bed and find warmth waiting a gift from a stone, a brick, or a pan connects us to centuries of human adaptation. It reminds us that before central heating, before electric blankets, people found ways to bring fire's gift close, to keep the night from overwhelming them. These humble tools, heated in flames and carried to bed, were more than objects. They were guardians of comfort, little pieces of survival glowing softly in the heart of winter. When the fire had dimmed, when the heated stones had cooled, there was still the question of what lay beneath and upon the sleeper. Bedding, what people lay on and what they pulled over themselves, was every bit as crucial to surviving the winter as clothing or fire. And across the centuries, people turned to the natural world for solutions: straw, feathers, and furs. Straw was the foundation of bedding for the majority of households. It was abundant after the harvest, easily replaced, and provided a cushion against the hard ground or wooden boards. In peasant cottages throughout Europe, straw-filled mattresses, sometimes called palliasses, were the norm. These were nothing more than sacks or cases stuffed with straw, renewed when the material became too flat, dirty, or infested with pests. In winter, fresh straw was especially welcome, for it trapped a surprising amount of body heat. Families might fluff or turn the mattress before bed, spreading the straw evenly to restore its insulating quality. Despite its practicality, straw was far from luxurious. It crunched, shifted, and over time became compacted into uncomfortable lumps. Mice and insects found their way into it easily, making it a less than ideal companion. Still, for countless generations, straw mattresses were the everyday solution, and for many, the only barrier between themselves and the cold air rising from the floor. The phrase "hitting the hay" is no accident. It recalls the literal act of lying down upon straw at the end of the day. For those who could afford better, feathers offered an altogether different experience. Feather beds, plump and soft, were symbols of wealth and comfort from the medieval period onward. They were made by collecting feathers and down, especially from geese or ducks, and sewing them into large sacks of cloth. These beds not only cushioned the body, but also held heat remarkably well. Nestled in feathers, a sleeper could feel cocooned, the body heat trapped in layers of softness. Owning a feather bed was a point of pride. In wills and inventories from the late Middle Ages and Renaissance, feather beds were often listed among the most valuable household possessions, handed down from generation to generation. To gift a daughter a feather bed as part of her marriage dowry was to ensure her comfort, a sign of prosperity and care. In winter, with icy drafts whispering through cracks in the walls, to sink into such a bed was to know a warmth and softness few others experienced. Yet even feather beds needed companions. Heavy covers, made of wool or layered cloth, were essential. In wealthy homes, quilts and coverlets might be embroidered, adding both warmth and decoration. For the poor, patched blankets or animal skins were spread over straw or simple cloth sacks. Whatever the material, the goal was the same: to trap every bit of warmth against the body, to keep the icy air of night at bay. Furs played a role that was both practical and symbolic. In regions where winters were harshest, animal pelts were invaluable for survival. Before synthetic fabrics, fur was one of nature's greatest insulators, keeping both the animal and the human who wore it alive in bitter cold. Families who hunted or raised animals might save the hides of sheep, goats, or deer, turning them into bed covers. Even small furs, like rabbit or squirrel, were stitched together to form larger pieces, spread across beds for warmth. In noble households, fur was not only warmth but luxury. Ermine, sable, fox, and marten adorned beds, garments, and cloaks. To pull a fur coverlet over oneself in winter was not merely to sleep warmly, but to display wealth and rank. Guests in such houses would immediately notice the richness of the bedding, just as they noticed the richness of the feast or the tapestries on the wall. In contrast, a peasant family might share a single sheepskin, worn thin from years of use. The principle of fur as insulation was universal, but the quality and quantity revealed the gulf between classes. Bedding materials often reflected geography. In Scandinavia, reindeer hides were prized, their thick, hollow hairs trapping heat more efficiently than almost any other material. In colder parts of Russia and Siberia, fur bedding was essential, with bear and wolf pelts sometimes used for their sheer size and warmth. In China, padded quilts made of cotton began to replace furs in some regions from the late medieval period onward, combining softness with warmth. In Japan, futons filled with cotton provided layered insulation, often combined with heated tables or braziers for additional comfort. Interestingly, straw and feathers often worked together. A straw mattress might form the base, while a feather bed was placed on top for wealthier families. In this way, the straw provided support and insulation, while the feather bed added luxury. Over all this came heavy coverings, sometimes so thick that turning over in bed became an effort. Travelers in past centuries often remarked on the sheer weight of bedclothes in winter, noting that while the warmth was welcome, the press of blankets could feel like being pinned down. The communal nature of beds meant that these materials were shared, just as warmth was shared. A family huddled under a single fur covering or on a straw mattress learned to move together, to shift positions as one. In inns, strangers might lie side by side, each clutching a corner of a blanket or quilt. In castles, lords and ladies might enjoy their feather beds alone, while servants slept several to a mattress in colder chambers. Bedding was not only physical comfort, it was social reality, shaping the way people interacted in the intimate hours of night. Maintaining bedding was another part of the winter struggle. Straw needed to be replaced regularly, or it grew musty and attracted pests. Feathers had to be fluffed and shifted, lest they clump and leave cold spots. Furs required care, brushing, and protection from moths. Even the wealthiest homes faced these challenges, though they had servants to manage them. For peasants, maintenance was more direct, tossing out old straw into the yard, sewing patches into warm covers, or simply enduring when resources ran short. Bedding, too, was tied to ritual and memory. Children were tucked in beneath familiar blankets, soothed by the same fur their parents had used before them. In some cultures, families kept special winter quilts, brought out only when the cold became too much to bear. These items carried meaning beyond fabric. They were heirlooms, comfort objects, woven into the rhythm of life. One can imagine the difference between slipping into bed on a straw palliasse with a single cloak pulled over, and sinking into a feather bed layered with quilts and furs. Yet in both cases, the relief from cold was profound. In the darkness of a winter night, the bedding became a refuge, a place where the body might find shelter from the relentless chill. Even today, echoes remain. Feather duvets, quilts, fur throws, these are descendants of centuries-old traditions. Though our homes are heated and our beds are private, the comfort of sinking into soft, warm bedding at the end of a cold day is something timeless. The materials may have changed, but the feeling is the same. It is the same comfort that peasants found in straw, nobles in feathers, hunters in furs. The bed was, and remains, the final fortress against winter. When the coldest months arrived, survival was rarely a solitary task. In the centuries before central heating, before insulated homes, and before reliable stores of fuel, people turned to one another for warmth and comfort. Winter was endured together, and the experience of communal living was one of the most important ways human beings overcame the long dark season. Imagine stepping into a medieval great hall on a midwinter night. The air is heavy with smoke from the hearth, and the murmur of voices fills the room. Families, servants, and guests gather close to the fire, seated on benches wrapped in cloaks and sharing food or drink. The Great Hall was not simply a space for feasting. It was the center of life during the winter months. Its very design reflected the need for shared survival. Large fires blazed in the center or along the wall, and the heat radiated outward. Without insulation, without glass windows to keep out drafts, warmth could not be trapped easily. Instead, it was created anew each evening by fire, voices, and bodies clustered together. In villages and towns, smaller cottages echoed this same principle. A single room might hold an entire family, and often their animals as well. Cows, goats, or sheep sometimes slept in part of the dwelling, their body heat adding to that of the humans. Chickens were brought indoors, tucked into corners, not only to protect them from frost, but also to benefit from the warmth they offered. The mingling of human and animal life was not always comfortable, but it was practical. Every body in the room became a small source of heat, and together they raised the temperature just enough to keep deathly cold at bay. The closeness of communal life also fostered traditions of storytelling, singing, and ritual. Winter evenings were long, and without the company of others, they could be unbearably silent. Families told tales around the fire, grandparents reciting stories of ancestors, parents teaching children through fables and parables. Songs were sung to pass the time, their rhythms echoing against wooden beams. These shared rituals were as important as warmth itself, binding communities together in the face of hardship. Communal living was not confined to families. Travelers, pilgrims, and strangers often found themselves thrown together in inns or monasteries. In an inn, a single room might hold a dozen or more guests, lying shoulder to shoulder on shared mattresses or straw pallets. Privacy was nearly non-existent, but the shared warmth and safety outweighed any discomfort. In monasteries, monks lived and slept in shared dormitories, their discipline shaping how they endured the cold together. Prayer, routine, and collective labor kept spirits steady, while the presence of brothers or sisters in faith brought comfort on bitter nights. The architectural design of homes often encouraged communal life in winter. In many peasant cottages, only one or two rooms existed, with a single hearth to heat them. Families ate, worked, and slept in the same shared space. Wealthier families might retreat into smaller chambers in winter, gathering closer together rather than spreading throughout the household. Even in castles, with their many rooms, entire families might crowd into the warmest chamber, leaving other halls cold and unused until spring. Communal living also extended to villages themselves. During harsh winters, neighbors relied on one another for survival. Wood might be shared, food exchanged, and labor pooled to dig paths through snow or repair damaged roofs. Feasts and festivals held in midwinter were not only celebrations, they were survival strategies, reminding people that they were part of a larger whole. The glow of a communal fire in a village square, the sharing of roasted meat or mulled drink, gave courage to face the season. In some cultures, communal sleeping was a long-established tradition. In Native American longhouses, extended families lived together under one roof, fires burning in the center, smoke rising through holes in the roof. These structures were designed to maximize shared warmth, with platforms along the sides for sleeping. In Central Asia, yurts offered a similar effect, with circular walls holding in heat and a central hearth warming all within. In such spaces, winter was not an individual struggle, but a collective one, endured shoulder to shoulder. The psychological comfort of communal living was as important as the physical warmth. To face winter alone could be frightening, even dangerous. Loneliness magnified the sense of cold, while company brought reassurance. Laughter, conversation, and the simple sound of another's breathing in the night helped ease anxiety. For children, especially, the presence of siblings or parents nearby made the long dark hours less daunting. Of course, communal living was not without its challenges. Crowded rooms meant little privacy, noise, and the quick spread of illness. In a shared bed or chamber, one person's cough could soon become everyone's fever. Tempers sometimes frayed, especially when supplies grew short and hunger gnawed at patience. Yet even with these difficulties, the benefits outweighed the drawbacks. The warmth of many bodies together was a defense against the greater danger of freezing. Communal winter life also reinforced social hierarchies. In noble houses, the family gathered in richly furnished chambers, while servants slept together in bare, cold quarters. In villages, wealthier households might manage a degree of separation, while poorer families crowded many into a single room. Yet across all classes, the underlying truth remained the same. No one truly endured winter alone. Rituals of hospitality grew from this reality. To invite a neighbor or traveler into the warmth of a fire was more than kindness. It was survival, shared among the community. Turning someone away on a bitter night could be seen as cruel, even dangerous, for winter demanded cooperation. Tales from folklore often warned against refusing shelter, tying the morality of generosity to the realities of cold nights. Communal living also shaped the rhythm of daily life. With so many sharing a space, activities had to be synchronized. Families rose together, worked together, and went to bed together. Light from the fire or candles was limited, so evenings were short and nights long. The group's routine became the individual's routine, a pattern enforced not by choice, but by necessity. In the silence of the coldest nights, when the fire had dwindled and only embers glowed, one can imagine the sound of a crowded room, soft breathing, shifting bodies, the faint rustle of straw. Children stirred, parents whispered reassurances, and animals shuffled in the shadows. Together, they formed a small island of warmth against the winter pressing at the door. Even today, traces of this communal warmth linger. Families gathering around the fireplace during holidays, friends huddling under shared blankets at winter festivals, or entire neighborhoods uniting during power outages all echo the ancient truth that people survive winter best when they survive it together. The isolation of modern life may be greater, but the instinct to gather in cold times remains strong. Communal living in winter was more than practicality. It was culture, memory, and resilience. It was the laughter of many voices in one room, the shared stories told beneath heavy blankets, the smell of smoke rising from a central fire. It was survival by togetherness, a reminder that warmth was not just fire or bedding, but the presence of other human beings enduring the long cold nights side by side. In winter, warmth came not only from fire, clothing, and bedding, but also from within the body itself. The food people ate and meals they prepared, the ingredients they treasured, was as much a defense against the cold as any cloak or fur. Before modern nutrition science, people instinctively understood that certain foods gave strength, that hearty meals could help endure long nights and biting winds. Winter food was, in its own way, fuel for survival. Imagine a medieval peasant kitchen in the depths of January. The fields outside lie fallow, the earth frozen and bare. There is no fresh harvest to gather, no fruit ripening on the trees. Instead, families relied on what they had carefully stored from previous months: grains, salted meats, dried legumes, and root vegetables buried in cellars. These staples were the foundation of winter life. Each bowl of porridge, each loaf of bread, each simmering pot of stew carried with it the warmth of sustenance, the energy to keep moving through the cold. Grains were perhaps the most vital of all. Wheat, barley, oats, and rye were stored in sacks or barrels, ground into flour, and baked into dense loaves. Bread was not simply food, it was life itself. In many languages, the word for bread became synonymous with food in general, a symbol of sustenance. In winter, when little else grew, bread kept families alive. Oats boiled into thick porridge filled the stomach, and eaten hot, gave a sense of comfort and warmth. Barley soups, flavored with whatever scraps of meat or herbs were available, were staples across Europe. Root vegetables were another winter treasure. Carrots, turnips, parsnips, and onions, when buried in sand or stored in cellars, could last for months. They became the backbone of stews and soups, simmering slowly in iron pots over the hearth. Their sweetness, released in cooking, added depth to otherwise simple meals. For poorer families, these humble vegetables might be the only fresh foods available through the dark months. Meat, when available, was carefully preserved for winter use. Autumn was often the season for slaughter, when animals that could not be fed through the cold months were butchered. The meat was salted, smoked, or dried, stored in barrels or hung from rafters. Through winter, it was rationed carefully, added in small amounts to stews, or eaten on feast days. The fat in meat was especially prized, for it provided energy and warmth. In some regions, suet or lard was saved and used in pastries or puddings, giving a dense, rich food that carried the body through hard labor in the cold. In wealthier households, winter meals were far more elaborate. Nobles dined on roasted game, spiced pies, and fish preserved in elaborate ways. Exotic spices, cinnamon, ginger, pepper, were used to flavor wine and food, not only for taste, but also because they were believed to warm the body. A cup of mulled wine, steaming with spices, was both a luxury and a comfort, a symbol of wealth and refinement in a season when most drank only water or weak ale. Dairy products, too, played their role. Cheese, aged and stored, provided protein long after milk was scarce. Butter, though more perishable, was sometimes preserved in cool cellars or salted for longer keeping. In northern Europe, butter became a key ingredient in winter meals, spread on bread or used in cooking. In poorer households, it might be rare, a treat saved for special days. Legumes, beans, peas, and lentils were the silent heroes of winter diets. Dried and stored in sacks, they lasted for months and provided vital nutrition when meat was scarce. A pot of pea soup, thick and filling, could feed a family for days. In monasteries, where meat was restricted, legumes formed the heart of winter meals, sustaining communities of monks through long fasts and cold nights. Alcohol, though not strictly food, was also part of winter sustenance. Ale and beer were safer to drink than water and provided calories. Wine, when available, warmed the spirit as much as the body. In colder regions, stronger spirits eventually emerged, distilled from grains or fruits, offering both comfort and a sense of warmth in the bleakest weather. Food in winter carried psychological weight as well as physical. A rich stew simmering on the hearth, its aroma filling the room, lifted spirits even before the first bite was taken. Meals brought families together, their shared warmth mirrored in the shared pot. To eat well in winter was to feel secure, to believe that the household had prepared enough, that the family would endure until spring returned. Festivals punctuated the winter diet, breaking the monotony of daily fare. Christmas, Yule, and other midwinter celebrations brought feasts of roasted meat, pies, and sweet treats. These were more than indulgence, they were reassurance, a reminder that joy and abundance could exist even in the harshest season. For peasants, the feast days of nobles or churches often provided rare opportunities to taste foods otherwise beyond their reach. A piece of roasted goose, a cup of spiced ale, a slice of sweet bread, these were memories that carried warmth far beyond the night itself. Cultural differences shaped winter diets around the world. In northern Asia, nomadic peoples relied heavily on meat and dairy, consuming rich broths and fatty cuts to endure extreme cold. In Japan, winter meals included hot pots, where vegetables, fish, and tofu simmered together in communal dishes, warming both body and spirit. In the Middle East, spice stews and hot drinks flavored with cinnamon and cardamom gave warmth even in milder winters. Across cultures, the principle was the same. Food was fuel, and winter demanded meals that were hearty, warming, and sustaining. Cooking itself became a ritual of warmth. Standing by the fire, stirring a pot, kneading dough, or roasting meat all brought heat to the body. The kitchen, when such a separate room existed, was often the warmest place in the house. Families gathered there not only to eat, but to sit, talk, and work, the glow of the hearth easing the cold. In smaller cottages, the line between cooking and living space blurred as the single fire served both needs at once. The scarcity of winter also taught the value of preservation. Salting, smoking, drying, fermenting, all were arts perfected to ensure that food lasted through the season. A barrel of salted fish, a sack of dried beans, a crock of sauerkraut, these were not luxuries, but necessities, the difference between hunger and survival. Each preserved item was a promise to the future, a guarantee that the family would endure until the thaw. Even today, echoes remain. The craving for rich stews, roasted meats, hot drinks, and spiced treats in winter is part of this long tradition. The foods that comfort us in cold months are not accidental. They are the same kinds of meals our ancestors relied upon for centuries. When we sip hot chocolate, stir a stew, or pull fresh bread from the oven on a snowy day, we connect to generations of people who found warmth through food. Winter food was never just about eating. It was about survival, community, and spirit. It was about gathering around a shared pot, about the smell of bread in the air, about the reassurance of a full belly when the world outside was frozen and dark. It was about using every resource, grain, root, meat, or bean, to keep the body strong and the heart hopeful. When winter nights stretched long and cold, when frost patterned the windows and smoke from the hearth curled lazily into the rafters, one of the simplest comforts was found in a cup. A warm drink, cradled between chilled hands, offered not only physical heat, but also a sense of calm, companionship, and cheer. And for much of history, that warmth was often laced with alcohol. In medieval and early modern Europe, ale and beer were staples of daily life. They were safer to drink than water, provided calories, and were available to nearly everyone. But in winter, these beverages often took on a new character. Heated gently by the fire, sweetened with honey, or spiced with cloves, nutmeg, or ginger, they became restorative, almost medicinal in people's minds. A mug of hot ale was more than refreshment. It was warmth itself, coursing through the body with each swallow. Mulled wine became one of the season's most beloved drinks. The practice stretched back to the Romans, who heated wine with spices and herbs, a custom that traveled across Europe. In medieval England, recipes for Hippocras instructed the cook to warm red wine with cinnamon, ginger, and sugar, straining it carefully before serving. It was considered not only delicious, but healthful, capable of driving away chills and melancholy. In France and Germany, similar traditions thrived, with glühwein still enjoyed at winter markets today. Each sip was a mingling of fire and vineyard, spice and sweetness, a sensory antidote to the cold outside. Cider, too, played its role. In apple-growing regions, particularly England and Normandy, cider was heated and mulled with spices. In some traditions, it became part of seasonal rituals, such as wassailing, where villagers carried hot spiced cider to orchards, singing to the trees and offering drink in hopes of a good harvest to come. The drink, steaming in mugs and shared among neighbors, was not just physical warmth, but also communal bonding, a reminder that winter was endured together. Hot mead, made from fermented honey, appeared in many northern cultures. Its sweetness and strength made it a celebratory drink, but also one that brought comfort in long winters. In Norse sagas, mead halls glowed with firelight and brimming cups, the drink symbolizing warmth, hospitality, and courage. Though mead was not always heated, when it was, its thick, honeyed flavor spread warmth as surely as the hearth itself. Not every warm drink contained alcohol. Herbal infusions, broths, and spiced waters were also common. In medieval medicine, warming herbs such as ginger, cinnamon, and cloves were recommended against winter ailments. These were steeped in hot water, sometimes sweetened with honey, and sipped for both comfort and cure. For many households that could not afford wine or beer in abundance, a simple herbal tisane, heated by the fire, offered similar relief. Across cultures, hot drinks took different forms. In China, tea had been cherished for centuries, its warmth spreading through palaces and villages alike. A steaming cup of green or black tea was as much a ritual as it was a comfort, providing focus, meditation, and warmth in winter. In Japan, tea ceremonies carried their own significance. The controlled gestures and steaming cups, a reminder of calm amid the cold. In the Middle East, coffee rose to prominence in the 15th and 16th centuries, its hot, dark liquid offering both stimulation and warmth. Coffee houses became social centers, where people gathered not only for the drink, but for conversation, music, and companionship. In winter, a cup of strong, steaming coffee provided the same comfort as mulled wine in Europe, a way to fend off the cold while bringing people together. Chocolate, introduced to Europe from the Americas in the 16th century, eventually joined the winter repertoire. Though initially consumed by elites, hot chocolate spread slowly, sweetened with sugar and flavored with cinnamon or vanilla. To hold a warm cup of chocolate in the hand was a mark of wealth in the early days, but also a sign of indulgence, a rich sweetness that softened the harshness of winter. For poorer households, warm drinks were simpler. A thin ale heated by the fire, a broth made from bones and scraps, or even hot water flavored with herbs or fruit peels might serve. The importance lay less in the richness of the drink than in its heat. To sip something warm was to feel, even briefly, protected against the season. The psychological comfort of hot drinks cannot be overstated. To gather around a table, to see steam rising from a mug, to feel heat spread into cold fingers, these experiences were as nourishing as the liquid itself. In many cultures, hospitality in winter was measured by the offering of a drink. To serve a guest mulled wine, hot tea, or strong coffee was to say, "Here is warmth, here is safety, here is welcome." Alcohol added another dimension. A cup of mulled wine or spiced ale not only warmed, but relaxed. In moderation, it soothed anxieties, eased social interactions, and brought laughter to rooms that otherwise might have been silent and tense. In excess, of course, it carried risks, but in the harshest winters, people often welcomed the comfort of cheer. For festivals, weddings, or midwinter feasts, hot alcoholic drinks were central, symbols of both survival and joy. Different regions developed their own beloved recipes. In Scandinavia, glögg mulled wine spiced with cinnamon, cardamom, and cloves remains a winter tradition. In Germany, Glühwein fills Christmas markets, its steam mingling with the scent of roasted chestnuts. In Eastern Europe, honey wines and vodkas are warmed, taken as fortifications against the snow. In the British Isles, wassail bowls brim with cider, shared in ritual and revelry. Each drink carries centuries of history, each cup linking the present to the past. Even children and those who avoided alcohol found comfort in hot drinks. Warm milk, sometimes spiced or sweetened, soothed restless children before bed. Broths and porridges were eaten steaming hot, more liquid than solid, warming from within. The principle was the same: heat delivered to the body by way of a cup or bowl, comfort offered sip by sip. To imagine winter in centuries past without these drinks is to miss one of the most human responses to the cold. Beyond fires, bedding, and clothing, there was always the desire to hold warmth in the hands, to sip it slowly, to let it spread through the chest. Each drink was a miniature hearth, portable and personal, offering a moment of relief. Even today, our winter habits echo these traditions. We gather around mugs of mulled wine at markets, sip hot cocoa by the fire, drink tea on frosty mornings, or warm ourselves with coffee on dark afternoons. These rituals are not new inventions, they are continuations, carrying forward the same desire for warmth, comfort, and companionship that guided our ancestors through the winters of long ago. In every steaming cup, in every shared drink, there is a reminder. Winter is endured best, not only with fire and shelter, but with warmth taken into the body, held in the hands, and shared among friends and family. When we picture winter long ago, it is easy to imagine fires, cloaks, and heavy blankets. But another source of warmth often walked on four legs, bleated in the barn, or clucked in the yard. Animals were more than food, labor, or symbols of wealth. They were living, breathing heaters, and their warmth was drawn upon in countless practical ways. In many households, the line between human space and animal space blurred in winter, for survival often meant sharing warmth with creatures great and small. In peasant cottages across medieval Europe, it was common for livestock to live under the same roof as their owners. Cows, goats, or sheep might occupy one end of the house, separated only by a low wall or partition from the family's living area. The heat of their bodies, steady, constant, and reliable, helped warm the space. Chickens, too, were sometimes brought indoors, roosting in corners or tucked into small cages. Their contribution may have been small compared to a cow's, but every bit of warmth mattered. The practical benefits were obvious. In winter, when fires struggled to heat drafty cottages, animals provided natural insulation. Their breath and bodies added to the general warmth of the room, and their presence ensured they too survived until spring. For a poor family, losing a cow or a few chickens to the cold could mean hunger in the months ahead. By bringing animals indoors, humans and beasts alike endured the cold season together. Dogs and cats, meanwhile, provided more personal warmth. A dog curled at the foot of the bed, or a cat nestled against a child, was a comfort known to families across the centuries. Cats were often welcomed, not only for their warmth, but also for their usefulness in keeping mice away from stored grain or straw bedding. Dogs, depending on their size, served as guardians of both warmth and security. Their steady presence beside a sleeper was reassurance in more ways than one. The bond between humans and animals deepened in winter because of this physical closeness. To stroke the fur of a dog by the fire, to feel a cat's weight on the bed, or to hear the steady breathing of cattle in the adjoining stall, all these small interactions reminded people they were not alone in the dark. In cultures where winters were especially harsh, animals became not only practical allies, but emotional companions. In colder climates, specialized practices developed. In parts of the Arctic, sled dogs were not just workers, but sleeping companions, their thick fur providing warmth during freezing nights. Hunters and travelers would often burrow into the snow with their dogs, sharing heat in a bond of necessity. In Mongolia and Central Asia, herders relied on horses, camels, and sheep not only for food and trade, but for warmth in their felt yurts, where animals were sometimes kept close in the worst storms. Folklore and tradition often reflected these practices. In some European cultures, there were sayings about the number of dogs needed to keep a bed warm on the coldest nights. A 3-dog night, for example, symbolized extreme cold. Such expressions reveal the everyday reliance on animals as companions of warmth, woven naturally into speech and memory. The wealthy, too, enjoyed animal warmth, though in more refined ways. Lapdogs were treasured not only for companionship, but for their ability to keep hands and laps warm in drafty chambers. Small dogs nestled into beds or cloaks, their soft fur valued like a living muff. In portraits of nobles, one often sees a small dog included, a symbol of loyalty and comfort, but also, quietly, a reminder of warmth on long winter nights. Horses, though not typically brought into homes, played their part in winter warmth as well. Stables, filled with the breath and bodies of many animals, became warm refuges compared to the icy air outside. For stable boys or workers, sleeping in the hay among horses was sometimes preferable to colder quarters elsewhere. The mingled heat of animals, hay, and straw created a microclimate that felt almost cozy compared to the bitter winds outside. In monasteries and farms, pigs and sheep were also sometimes housed close to humans. Their heat, their smell, and their sounds were simply part of winter life. To modern sensibilities, the idea of animals in the living space may seem unclean or uncomfortable, but to past generations, it was practical. The warmth of an animal's body was as real as that of a fire or a bed of straw, and far too valuable to leave outside in the snow. Beyond survival, there was comfort. Children especially delighted in the warmth of animals. A child might fall asleep nestled against a dog, or laugh at the tickle of a cat's purr beneath the blankets. For parents, the sight of animals sleeping peacefully among their children was reassurance that warmth and safety were shared across the household. Yet there were drawbacks. Animals brought indoors carried dirt, pests, and odors. They ate precious food, demanded attention, and sometimes caused accidents near the hearth or bedding. Diseases could pass between humans and animals, though people at the time rarely understood the causes. Still, these inconveniences were tolerated, for the balance of warmth was in the animal's favor. Communities adapted their architecture to this reality. Longhouses in Scandinavia, for example, were designed to house both people and animals, their shared heat rising together. In alpine regions, chalets often kept cattle in the lower level, with families living above, warmed by the heat that rose from the animals below. Such designs were deliberate, recognizing animals not only as resources, but as sources of life-giving warmth in the harshest months. Animals also appeared in winter rituals and blessings. Farmers prayed for the health of livestock through the cold, knowing their survival meant food and warmth for the family. In some traditions, animals were even symbolically included in Christmas or midwinter celebrations, honored for their role in sustaining life. Stories told by the fire sometimes gave animals voices in the winter night, reflecting their closeness to human existence. Even today, we know the comfort of animals in winter. A cat curling beside you, a dog stretched across your feet, or even the sight of livestock huddled together in a barn carries echoes of the past. The instinct to draw warmth from animals and to share warmth with them in return is one of the oldest forms of companionship we know. In the long nights of history, when the world outside froze solid, animals were more than property. They were partners in survival, sources of heat, comfort, and company. To lie in bed and feel the weight of a dog at your feet, to hear the soft shuffle of a cow in the stall, to sense the living warmth of creatures near you, this was to know that you were not alone against the cold. It was to share, in the most natural way, the ancient warmth of life itself. When winter closed in, when snow piled against doors and frost etched windows with delicate patterns, the design of a home often determined whether its occupants endured in comfort or shivered through long, sleepless nights. Long before central heating, architects, builders, and families devised ways to trap heat, shield against wind, and create spaces that held warmth as tightly as possible. In every culture, architecture itself became a weapon against the cold. Imagine a peasant cottage in medieval Europe. Built of timber, wattle, and daub, or rough stone, its walls were thick but rarely airtight. Smoke leaked through the thatch, and drafts slipped through cracks in shutters or doors. Yet even in these modest structures, careful choices made survival possible. The hearth was central, placed not only for cooking, but also to radiate warmth into the living space. Ceilings were low, so heat did not drift too far upward. Families clustered close to this core, learning to live within the limited zone of warmth the fire provided. In northern climates, insulation was everything. Thick stone walls, though cold to the touch, could retain heat when warmed by fire. In Scandinavia, Log houses were favored, the wood stacked tightly to block wind. In Russia, homes known as izbas were constructed from pine logs, their interiors heated by massive masonry stoves. These stoves, once lit, absorbed heat from the fire and released it slowly for hours, sometimes even days. Families often slept on top of the stove itself or on raised platforms above it, where the air was warmer. That principle of raised sleeping was common. In alpine chalets, livestock occupied the ground floor, while families lived above. The animal's body heat rose, warming the living quarters. Floors were built of thick planks, sometimes layered with moss or straw for insulation. Roofs sloped steeply, shedding snow before it grew heavy, and extended outward to shield walls from icy winds. Every feature reflected centuries of trial and error in living with winter. Windows posed a particular challenge. Glass was rare and expensive until the later Middle Ages. So many homes had only wooden shutters or oiled cloth stretched across openings. These kept out some wind, but allowed little light. Wealthier homes might use small panes of glass, often set in lead, which admitted sunlight yet trapped warmth. In the harshest climates, windows were tiny, more holes than openings, designed to minimize heat loss. Curtains or shutters inside were used as extra barriers, drawn tightly at night to seal in warmth. Thatched roofs, common across Europe, were surprisingly good insulators. Layers of straw or weeds packed thickly together trapped heat and shed water. Smoke from the hearth often filtered through the thatch, adding a measure of preservation by drying it and discouraging pests. For all their rustic appearance, thatched roofs served as one of the best defenses against winter chill. Urban architecture also adapted. In medieval towns, houses were built close together, their walls almost touching. Narrow streets meant less exposure to wind, and heat radiated from one building to the next. Upper stories often jutted outward, providing shelter below and conserving heat above. In these crowded quarters, warmth was shared not only within families, but across entire neighborhoods. In wealthier estates and castles, architecture allowed for more elaborate defenses against winter. Great halls were cavernous, often difficult to heat, but private chambers were designed with smaller fireplaces, heavy tapestries, and thick carpets. Fireplaces evolved over time, from simple hearths to more efficient designs with chimneys, drawing smoke away and allowing fires to burn hotter. Chimneys, spreading widely in the late Middle Ages, transformed living spaces, making rooms cleaner and warmer. Tapestries hung on walls were not merely decoration. They acted as insulation, blocking drafts that slipped through stone or wooden walls. Heavy curtains around beds served the same function, creating small enclosed climates where warmth lingered. Floors were strewn with rushes, straw, or carpets, softening the ground and adding layers of insulation against cold that seeped upward. Every detail, from curtain to carpet, had its role in creating warmth. In Asia, architectural responses took different but equally clever forms. In northern China, the Kangha large heated platform dominated many homes. Built of brick or clay, it was connected to the kitchen stove or fireplace. As fires burned, heat flowed through flues beneath the platform, warming it for sleeping or sitting. Families gathered on the Kang during the coldest months, combining daily life and rest in the same heated space. In Korea, the ondol system functioned similarly, channeling heat from fires beneath the floor through stone flues. This created radiant floor heating centuries before modern systems. The entire room grew warm from below, and families slept on mats spread across the heated floor. These designs reveal an ancient ingenuity, a deep understanding of how to capture and distribute the power of fire throughout a home. Nomadic peoples, too, built with winter in mind. In Central Asia, yurts were constructed of felt stretched over wooden frames, their thick layers insulating against both cold and wind. The circular design conserved heat, while a central hearth provided warmth. In Arctic regions, igloos made of snow created shelters that were surprisingly effective. Snow, though cold to the touch, trapped air and insulated the interior, allowing body heat and small lamps to create a livable environment, even in sub-zero temperatures. Religion and ritual often wove into architecture as well. Hearths were sacred places, not only for their warmth, but for their role as the center of home and family. To design a house without thought to the hearth was unthinkable. The goddess Vesta in Rome, Hestia in Greece, and countless household spirits across cultures were tied to fire and the architecture that sheltered it. The physical act of building was inseparable from the spiritual hope of warmth. Of course, not all dwellings were equal. The poor often lived in drafty huts or shacks, with little insulation beyond what nature provided. Their walls might be patched with mud, their roofs with straw or sod. The wealthy, in contrast, could afford stone fortifications, fireplaces, tapestries, and multiple chambers. The difference between freezing and comfort was often measured in the quality of architecture. Yet even the humblest homes reflected ingenuity. Thicker walls on the north side, entrances shielded from wind, and sleeping areas clustered near the hearth. The experience of winter inside these homes was deeply shaped by design. In a smoky cottage, the warmth might be limited, but concentrated. The family gathered close. In a castle chamber, a fire might roar beneath a stone mantel, tapestries glowing in the firelight. In an Asian home, families might sit together on heated platforms, sharing meals and stories in comfort. Each design spoke of adaptation, a balance between resource, tradition, and the unyielding cold outside. Even today, traces remain. Thatched cottages, stone chalets, and log cabins still stand, their designs a testament to centuries of winter adaptation. Modern floor heating systems echo the principles of the ondel and the kang. Curtains, carpets, and insulation carry forward the same purpose as tapestries and rushes. We may live in homes with electricity and central heating, but the architectural fight against winter is ancient, etched into every beam and stone. Architecture was not only shelter, it was warmth embodied, a physical embrace against the cold. To step into a well-built home in winter was to feel instantly the difference between survival and struggle. Walls, roofs, hearths, and stoves. These were as vital as food or clothing, each detail a defense against frost. In the darkest months, a house was not just a building. It was a fortress of heat, a crafted cocoon that allowed life to endure until spring returned. When nights grew longest and frost tightened its grip, people turned not only to fire, food, and furs, but also to belief. For centuries, winter was seen as more than just a season. It was a force, a presence, something to be respected, feared, and sometimes battled with charms, rituals, and prayers. In many cultures, warmth was not only a matter of physical endurance, but of spiritual defense. Superstition and magic became another layer of protection against the cold. Imagine a small cottage in a medieval village. The fire flickers low, its light casting shifting shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind howls, rattling shutters, whispering through cracks in the door. To those inside, it feels as though spirits roam in the darkness, carried by the icy air. A mother crosses herself as she stirs the pot, muttering a quiet prayer that the frost will not claim the crops stored in the barn. A child, tucked into bed, clutches a charm of carved wood said to guard against chills. The family believes that warmth is not just about what they can touch, but also about unseen forces they can appease. In many parts of Europe, frost and snow were personified as beings. Jack Frost in later folklore, the Norse god Ol, or the Slavic figure Morocco, all represented the cold as something with personality and power. To keep warm was not only to guard the body, but to guard the spirit against these presences. People left offerings, food, drink, or prayers, hoping to soften the bite of winter. Charms against the cold took many forms. In some traditions, Iron objects were kept near the hearth or beneath pillows, believed to ward off malevolent spirits that brought frostbite or illness. Herbs like rosemary, sage, or juniper were burned, their fragrant smoke thought to purify the air and protect against chills. In northern regions, runes were carved into wood or bone, symbols of warmth and survival. These were tucked into clothing, hidden in walls, or worn around the neck as talismans. Superstitions about clothing were also common. In some places, it was believed unlucky to put on a left shoe before the right in winter, for it might invite misfortune or illness. Certain colors were thought to ward off frost red in particular, with its association with fire and life, was worn as a symbolic shield against the cold. Children might be dressed in red ribbons or caps during harsh winters, a charm as much as a garment. Fires themselves were surrounded by ritual. To let the hearth fire go out in midwinter was considered dangerous, even unlucky. Families often kept embers smoldering beneath ash, ensuring continuity from one day to the next. Rekindling from scratch was not only laborious, but symbolically risky. It might invite spirits of cold into the home. In some regions, special logs were burned at midwinter festivals, their flames seen as protective. The Yule log, for example, was more than just a festive fire. It was a ritual act, ensuring warmth and luck for the household in the year to come. Water and ice also carried superstitions. In parts of Eastern Europe, it was customary to bless rivers or wells during winter, asking protection from freezing and ensuring clean water through the cold months. In Russia, the Orthodox Epiphany tradition of cutting crosses into frozen rivers and bathing in the icy water blended ritual with resilience. To face the cold in a sacred act was to believe one could master it, spiritually if not physically. Illness in winter was often attributed to spirits or curses rather than germs. A cough might be seen as a sign that the frost spirits had touched a person, or that a charm had failed. Healers prescribed both practical remedies and magical ones, herbal teas alongside whispered incantations, warm cloaks alongside blessed amulets. The line between medicine and magic was blurred, for both aimed at the same goal, keeping warmth in and cold out. Communal rituals often reinforced these beliefs. Villages might gather for midwinter festivals, lighting bonfires not only for warmth, but to drive away spirits of darkness and frost. Songs, chants, and dances circled the flames, their rhythms echoing through the cold night. These events were not just celebrations, they were protective acts, warding off the season's dangers by facing them together. Animals, too, were thought to be tied to winter magic. In some traditions, cats were believed to sense spirits of cold, curling near ailing children to protect them. Dogs howling in the night were taken as warnings of frost or storms approaching. Farmers sometimes tied protective charms to livestock, believing that a cow's warmth was as vulnerable to spirits as a child's breath. Dreams during winter were also viewed through the lens of superstition. To dream of fire was considered lucky, a sign of warmth and health to come. To dream of ice or snow might foretell hardship, unless countered with ritual acts upon waking. Some families kept dream books, interpreting visions as warnings or blessings tied to the cold season. Even architecture carried magical protections. In some cottages, herbs or charms were placed above doors or beneath thresholds, ensuring that the frost spirits would not enter. In Scandinavian traditions, carved symbols were added to beams and doorposts, calling on protective gods or spirits to keep the household warm. These carvings were not decoration but defense, as essential as the roof itself. Wealth did not entirely shield people from such beliefs. Nobles, too, relied on charms and rituals. They might commission priests to bless their hearths, or consult astrologers for guidance on the best times to light great winter fires. In royal courts, festivals of light and fire were staged not only for merriment, but as symbolic acts of triumph over cold and darkness. Superstition also shaped how people viewed the turning of seasons. The winter solstice was marked with rituals of renewal, where fire, candles, and torches symbolized the return of the sun. People believed that by honoring these cycles, they could encourage the warmth to come back sooner, hastening the end of frost. Though modern science explains the cold with weather patterns and temperature, the emotional reality of winter has changed little. The chill still feels like an adversary, the long nights still heavy. In earlier times, when survival was more fragile, it was natural to imagine spirits, curses, or blessings behind every snowstorm. Magic gave people a sense of agency, a belief that their actions, whether tying a red ribbon, lighting a log, or whispering a prayer, could influence the great, indifferent force of winter. Even today, echoes remain. We light candles in the darkest months, decorate homes with evergreens, sip spiced drinks, and tell stories of Santa Claus or Father Frost. These traditions, though softened by time, carry the same heart as older superstitions, a desire to push back the dark, to invite warmth and cheer into the coldest season. For our ancestors, superstition and magic were not foolishness but comfort. They were ways of making sense of the cold, of feeling less powerless before its grip. To believe that a charm could keep frost away, that a log could bless the home, or that a spirit might be appeased by song, was to find warmth in hope itself. And sometimes, hope was as necessary as fire. While peasants huddled together on straw mattresses, wrapped in patched cloaks, and relying on shared body heat, the wealthy faced winter in a very different way. Lords, ladies, merchants, and monarchs did not escape the cold entirely. No stone castle or marble palace was immune to winter. Spite, but their resources allowed them to fight it, with a degree of comfort and luxury that ordinary people could scarcely imagine. Imagine stepping into a great hall of a medieval castle in December. The walls are hung with heavy tapestries, richly embroidered, their colors glowing in the firelight. Servants stoke enormous hearths, flames roaring as logs the size of small trees burn steadily. The air smells of smoke, roasted meat, and spiced wine. Though the room is vast and drafts still creep through arrow slits and windows, the sheer scale of fire and wealth makes the space bearable. For the lord and his household, winter is endured with grandeur. Tapestries were among the most practical luxuries of noble households. More than art, they acted as insulation, blocking drafts that slipped through stone walls. Hung in layers, they created warmth where bare stone would have radiated cold. Some depicted hunting scenes, mythological tales, or family crests, but behind their beauty was function. They were fabric walls against winter. Furnishings also reflected the struggle against cold. Beds in wealthy homes were not simple pallets, but towering four-posters, often draped with thick curtains. These curtains created enclosed microclimates, trapping the heat of bodies and fires alike. Inside, feather mattresses and fur-lined quilts offered softness and insulation, making sleep a warm, cocoon-like experience. For nobles, slipping into such a bed was a nightly ritual of luxury, far removed from the straw sacks of commoners. Fireplaces became a focal point of aristocratic life. Unlike the smoky central hearths of peasant cottages, noble fireplaces were often large, built with chimneys that efficiently drew smoke upward. This innovation allowed fires to burn hotter and cleaner, heating rooms more effectively. In some palaces, multiple fireplaces burned simultaneously, filling chambers with a steady warmth. Servants worked constantly to keep them fueled, hauling logs from vast woodpiles stacked outside. For the wealthy, the fire was not only heat but spectacle, its glow a symbol of abundance. Portable sources of warmth added to this comfort. Braziers' metal containers filled with coals were carried from room to room, placed beneath tables, or set near chairs. Ladies extended their skirts over the braziers, trapping heat beneath layers of fabric. Hand warmers made of silver or brass, small enough to slip into gloves or sleeves, glowed with embers and kept fingers from freezing. These were luxuries unthinkable for the poor, but in noble households, they became everyday tools of winter life. Clothing, too, reflected wealth's defense against the cold. While peasants layered wool and patched furs, nobles donned garments of velvet, lined with sable or ermine. Cloaks trimmed with fur swept the floor, while gloves and hats displayed not only warmth, but status. To wear ermine in winter was to declare one's rank as loudly as a coat of arms. Jewel-encrusted brooches pinned heavy mantles in place, serving both function and fashion. In portraits from the Renaissance, nobles are often shown wrapped in rich furs, their wealth literally embodied in warmth. Food and drink also played their part. While peasants rationed salted meat and thin soups, nobles feasted on roasted game, hot pies, and spiced wine. Kitchens in castles and palaces worked tirelessly, turning out dishes that not only nourished but comforted. Mulled wine, hippocras, and hot mead flowed freely, their steam and spices adding to the sense of cheer. Banquets were often held in midwinter, less for necessity than for morale, transforming the harsh season into a display of abundance. Architecture itself was adapted for luxury in winter. Some palaces, particularly in Renaissance Italy and later in France, included galleries designed for walking indoors during cold weather. Sunrooms and enclosed courtyards allowed nobles to enjoy light without exposure to frost. Windows, fitted with glass, became more common in wealthy homes, keeping out drafts while admitting the sun. Floors were covered with thick carpets, imported from the East, their patterns as dazzling as their insulation was practical. In Russia, where winters were especially brutal, the nobility relied on vast masonry stoves. In wealthy estates, these stoves were built into walls, their heat radiating through entire suites of rooms. In some cases, hidden passageways behind stoves allowed servants to tend fires unseen, ensuring that noble chambers remained warm without the disruption of smoke or noise. The result was a seamless luxury, constant warmth, invisible labor. Yet even the rich could not entirely escape the cold. Accounts from courts across Europe describe icy chambers, frozen ink pots, and noble ladies shivering despite layers of furs. Versailles, with all its splendor, was infamous for being drafty and difficult to heat. Courtiers complained of freezing halls, their breath visible as they waited for audiences with the king. Fires roared, yet the vastness of the palace meant warmth was uneven, and only those closest to the hearth truly basked in comfort. For this reason, nobles often retreated to smaller, more intimate chambers in winter. Private rooms with low ceilings, thick curtains, and multiple tapestries became the preferred spaces. Here, surrounded by luxuries and served by attendants, warmth could be better contained. Even in palaces, the principle of drawing close and limiting space prevailed, echoing the strategies of peasants in cottages, though wrapped in velvet instead of wool. Entertainment also reflected the season. In noble courts, winter evenings were filled with music, dancing, and storytelling by the fire. The glow of hearths set the stage for elaborate performances, while the warmth of wine and laughter softened the cold outside. In some places, nobles even turned winter into sport, holding sled races, ice skating events, or snowball games on palace grounds. The cold was transformed from hardship into diversion, a testament to how wealth could reshape experience. Servants bore the brunt of maintaining these luxuries. While nobles reclined by the fire, attendants hauled wood, stoked braziers, and tended to bedding. Kitchens bustled with labor, preparing hot meals that required endless hours near smoke and heat. Stables had to be kept warm for prized horses, cellars monitored for wine and supplies. For the household staff, winter was a season of constant toil, ensuring that their masters felt little of the season's hardships. The contrast between noble and peasant winter life could not have been sharper. While villagers shivered together in smoky cottages, nobles stretched out beneath fur canopies, sipping spiced wine. While poor children clutched one another beneath a single blanket, royal heirs sank into feather mattresses, warmed by hand warmers and guarded by servants. Both endured winter, but the experience was separated by wealth as much as by walls. Yet, across all classes, the same truth lingered. Winter was relentless, and even the rich felt its sting. For every roaring fire in a palace, there was a draught in the hall. For every fur-lined cloak, there was still a frosty breath in the morning. Wealth could soften the season, transform it into spectacle and comfort, but it could not erase it. Even today, traces of these luxuries remain. We hang heavy curtains against drafts, sip mulled wine at holiday markets, and wrap ourselves in faux furs or thick quilts. Fireplaces, carpets, and decorated walls still symbolize warmth and comfort. The palaces of the past remind us that winter has always been a challenge, one met with ingenuity, beauty, and no small measure of labor. For the wealthy of history, winter was a chance to display not only survival, but magnificence. Palaces in winter glowed with fire, music, and feasting, their walls hung with tapestries, their floors covered in carpets, their tables laden with steaming dishes. They endured not with bare necessity, but with luxury, transforming the harshest season into an opportunity for display. And yet, whether in a drafty castle or a small cottage, the heart of winter remained the same: a desire for warmth, the need for comfort, and the gathering of people around fire, food, and companionship. In this way, noble or peasant, palace or hut, humanity's answer to winter was shared, though expressed in very different forms. For people who lived in permanent houses of stone, timber, or clay, winter was a season endured within familiar walls. But for nomadic peoples, herders, traders, and wanderers whose homes were designed to move with them, winter demanded an entirely different kind of resilience. Their shelters had to be portable, adaptable, and strong enough to withstand bitter winds and icy nights, yet light enough to be carried across vast landscapes. Through tents, yurts, and ingenious methods of portable warmth, nomads across the world developed their own defenses against the cold. Imagine the Central Asian steppe in midwinter. The land stretches endlessly, flat and white, with the wind sweeping across in relentless gusts. There are no forests to provide shelter, no stone houses to retreat into, only sky, snow, and the curved outline of a felt yurt rising from the plain. Inside, though, the atmosphere is transformed. The thick felt walls trap heat, a fire burns in the central hearth, and families gather on carpets spread across the ground. For centuries, the yurt has been the heart of nomadic life, as much a defense against the cold as a symbol of community. Yurts were masterpieces of design. A wooden frame, circular and strong, supported layers of thick felt made from compressed wool. Felt, naturally insulating, held warmth in winter and repelled wind and snow. The circular shape prevented corners where drafts might gather, and the domed roof encouraged air to circulate evenly. At the center, a hearth or stove provided heat and cooking fire, with smoke escaping through a small hole at the top. Families lived, worked, and slept around this central flame, their daily rhythms revolving around the warmth it offered. Portability was key. Nomads moved with their herds, and the yurt could be dismantled, packed onto camels or horses, and rebuilt at the next camp. Yet despite its mobility, it was sturdy, capable of withstanding fierce storms. Inside, rugs, furs, and blankets lined the walls and floors, creating layers of insulation. Each surface absorbed and reflected heat, so that even in the depths of winter, the space felt secure and livable. Other nomadic groups developed similar solutions. In Mongolia, felt and leather tents provided warmth, while in Tibet, yak hair tents offered protection against freezing winds. The coarse fibers, woven tightly, resisted snow and allowed smoke to escape. Though darker inside than felt yurts, these tents were durable and portable, essential for high-altitude living where winters were long and severe. In the deserts of the Middle East and North Africa, Bedouins relied on black goat hair tents, known as Beit al-Shar or House of Hair. While desert winters are milder than those of the steppe or tundra, nights could be bitterly cold. The goat hair fabric expanded when wet, tightening the weave to block wind and retain warmth, and loosened when dry to allow ventilation. Families huddled close under layers of blankets and cloaks, often gathering around small braziers that glowed with coals. Their tents, portable and adaptable, offered shelter that balanced warmth in winter with breathability in summer. Further north, in Arctic regions, indigenous peoples relied on snow itself for shelter. The igloo, built of compacted snow blocks, seems counterintuitive, yet snow is a powerful insulator. Inside, body heat and small oil lamps could raise the temperature significantly, creating an environment far warmer than the frozen tundra outside. Igloos were temporary, built for hunting expeditions or short stays, but they demonstrate the same principle as yurts and tents: portability, insulation, and clever use of available resources. Nomads also turned to animals for portable warmth. Herds provided more than food. They supplied hides, wool, and fur, all vital for winter survival. In Central Asia, sheepskins were used as bedding, layered on the floors of yurts. Camel hair was spun into blankets, its coarse fibers retaining heat. In the Arctic, caribou and reindeer hides lined sleds and sleeping platforms, their hollow hairs trapping warmth more efficiently than almost any other material. Travelers wrapped themselves in these hides while resting, often burrowing into snowdrifts with dogs or reindeer beside them, sharing heat in the most direct way possible. Communal warmth was essential for nomads. Families slept together, huddled beneath shared blankets or furs, often with children in the middle. Fires or braziers burned throughout the night, tended carefully to ensure they did not go out. In yurts, stoves were often fueled by dried dung, gathered and stored for winter use. Though the fuel was humble, it provided steady heat without the need for scarce wood. In nomadic life, nothing was wasted. Every resource, whether animal, plant, or mineral, contributed to warmth. Rituals and beliefs also surrounded portable shelters. In Mongolia, the doorway of a yurt always faced south, away from cold northern winds. This orientation was practical, but also symbolic, tied to tradition and spirituality. In Bedouin culture, the tent was divided into sections for men and women, with the hearth often serving as a shared center. In the Arctic, igloos were built with care, their entrance tunnels designed to trap cold air below while keeping the interior space warmer above. The act of building and arranging these shelters was as much cultural as it was practical, reflecting values of community, hospitality, and survival. Nomadic shelters were also deeply social. The fire in a yurt, the brazier in a tent, or the lamp in an igloo became the heart of family life. Stories were told, songs sung, and meals shared in these circles of warmth. Outside, the wind might howl across empty plains, deserts, or ice fields, but inside, the glow of firelight and the closeness of kin created comfort. A shelter was not only physical, but emotional, a reminder that even in the most barren environments, life could feel secure. For travelers and traders, portable warmth was crucial. Merchants crossing deserts or steppes relied on tents for nightly shelter, often shared with strangers for mutual protection. Caravanserais roadside inns provided more permanent shelter, but when none were available, a tent or a simple windbreak made of cloaks and blankets had to suffice. To share warmth with fellow travelers was both necessity and custom. Hospitality extended to strangers as part of the long traditions of survival on the move. Even today, echoes of these practices remain. Modern camping tents, sleeping bags, and portable stoves all carry the same principles as yurts, igloos, and goat hair shelters. Insulation, portability, and shared warmth continue to define how humans endure cold in temporary settings. Festivals, expeditions, and camping trips still remind us of what our nomadic ancestors knew so well: That warmth is not just fire, but shelter, insulation, and companionship. For nomads, winter was not avoided but adapted to. Their shelters, ingenious, portable, and deeply tied to culture, were living answers to the question of how to endure cold without permanent walls. In yurts glowing with firelight, in tents woven from hair and hide, in igloos shining faintly beneath the northern sky, humanity found ways to carry warmth with them wherever the seasons led. For most people in history, staying warm in winter meant fire, furs, and food. But when the season turned especially brutal, when storms raged and snow buried homes, survival sometimes demanded extraordinary measures. Across the centuries, humans learned not only to endure the cold, but to use it, turning snow, ice, and winter itself into unexpected allies. These extreme adaptations show the ingenuity of people who faced nature's harshest challenges with creativity and determination. Imagine a village after a heavy blizzard. Roofs sag under the weight of snow, paths vanish into white drifts, and the cold bites so hard it burns the skin. For many, the instinct is to fight against snow cleared away, shut it out, resist it. But for others, snow itself became a resource. Packed tight, it could form walls that insulated against even harsher winds. Hollowed out, it became shelter, trapping body heat and providing surprising warmth within its frozen walls. In Arctic regions, indigenous peoples perfected this principle with the igloo. Made from carefully cut blocks of snow, the igloo turned the enemy of cold into a shield. Snow's structure trapped air, making it an excellent insulator. Inside an igloo, temperatures could rise above freezing, sometimes even comfortably warm, with the help of oil lamps and body heat. Hunters traveling across frozen landscapes built igloos as temporary shelters, their curved walls protecting them from gales that could strip warmth in seconds. For those who lived in such environments, this knowledge was not luxury, it was survival. Elsewhere, snow caves were used by travelers, soldiers, and shepherds caught in storms. By digging into drifts, creating low tunnels and chambers, people could create shelters that preserved precious heat. The very snow that threatened to freeze them instead became a refuge. In alpine regions, shepherds and hunters passed down the knowledge of snow caves, teaching that survival depended not only on fire, but on the ability to work with the landscape itself. But snow was not only shelter, it was also storage. Long before refrigeration, ice houses became a key tool for preserving food. Wealthy estates in cities across Europe, the Middle East, and Asia built underground chambers lined with stone or brick, filled with ice harvested from rivers and lakes in winter. Packed with straw or sawdust, the ice lasted for months, sometimes through the hottest days of summer. Though primarily designed for preservation, ice houses reveal a paradox. In order to endure cold winters, people sometimes learn to harness and save the cold itself. In Persia, for example, vast domed ice houses called yakshals were built from thick mud brick. Their ingenious design included underground storage pits and wind-catching towers that funneled cool air inside. These structures preserved ice gathered in winter, ensuring cool water and food storage for months. While they represent mastery over summer heat, they also show how cultures adapted winter's extremes for year-round survival. In Northern Europe, ice harvesting was a communal event. When rivers froze, men cut large blocks, dragging them by sled to cellars or ice houses. Stored carefully, this ice not only preserved meat and fish, but also provided luxury for the wealthy, who enjoyed chilled drinks even in summer. The labor was grueling, the air sharp and cold, but the reward was security food that would not spoil, survival ensured by winter's own gift. Extreme winters also forced people to adapt their daily routines. In the harshest years, such as the Little Ice Age that gripped Europe from the 14th to the 19th centuries, rivers froze solid, crops failed, and communities suffered famine. To endure, people relied on whatever resources they could find. Some turned to snow as insulation, burying root vegetables beneath drifts where the cold preserved them better than damp cellars. Others used snow as a barrier, piling it against walls to block drafts, creating a frozen shield that ironically kept warmth inside. Travel in extreme winter required its own survival measures. Roads buried by snow were sometimes navigated only by sledges, pulled by horses or dogs. Travelers carried furs, cloaks, and heated stones, but also the knowledge of how to survive a night if stranded digging into snowbanks, building windbreaks of ice, or huddling with animals for warmth. Entire cultures developed skills for surviving such ordeals, passing them down as essential knowledge rather than extraordinary tricks. Military history is filled with tales of armies caught in winter's grip. Soldiers in Napoleon's retreat from Russia in 1812, or during campaigns in the Alps, faced nights of unimaginable cold. Many survived by building makeshift shelters of snow, wrapping themselves in whatever materials they could find, or sharing heat in crowded bivouacs. Fires were precious, but when wood was scarce, the very snow they marched across sometimes became their only protection. Extreme winters revealed that survival demanded flexibility and openness to use whatever nature provided, even its most fearsome elements. Folklore often captured the awe and fear of such measures. Stories told of people who survived blizzards by digging into snowbanks, or who built shelters from ice and lived to tell the tale. These accounts carried lessons, reminding listeners that winter could be endured if met with knowledge and courage. To respect snow and ice was to survive. To underestimate them was to perish. In wealthier contexts, extreme cold even became an opportunity for spectacle. During harsh winters in Europe, rivers like the Thames froze solid, leading to frost fairs. Tents, fires, and even entire markets sprang up on the ice. While peasants used snow for survival, nobles and merchants sometimes turned it into amusement, building temporary shelters for feasting and merriment on frozen rivers. Yet beneath the joy was the same truth. Adapting to extreme cold required creativity, whether for survival or for celebration. The psychology of extreme measures also mattered. To step inside a snow cave or igloo, to feel the air grow still and warmer than the biting wind outside, must have felt like magic. The transformation of hostile cold into protective shelter reassured people that survival was possible. In times of famine or freezing storms, such small victories, whether a dugout drift, a glowing lamp, or a cache of ice preserved in a cellar, gave hope. Today, we still echo some of these practices. Campers and mountaineers are taught to build snow shelters in emergencies. Ice houses have their descendants in modern freezers. The idea of insulating with snow is still used in Arctic research stations, where banks of ice block wind and conserve heat. The lessons of the past remain, showing that even in the most extreme conditions, human ingenuity can carve warmth from the cold itself. Extreme measures, snow shelters, ice houses, frozen storage were not everyday habits for most. They were responses to the hardest winters, the fiercest storms, the most desperate needs. But they reveal something universal, the determination to survive, to adapt, and even to thrive in the face of nature's harshest season. For those who built homes of snow, who stored ice for summer, or who dug into drifts to endure a night, winter was not only endured, but transformed, its very weapons turned into tools of life. In the bleakest months of winter, when the nights were longest and the days shortest, people across the world turned to light, fire, and celebration. Festivals were more than merriment. They were acts of defiance against the cold and darkness, reminders that warmth and joy could be kindled even in the harshest season. Fires blazed, songs rose, and communities gathered to push back against winter silence. Imagine a small village in medieval Europe in mid-December. The fields outside lie barren. The air carries the sting of frost, and the breath of animals steams in the cold barns. Yet in the village square, flames roar high in a great bonfire. Children laugh, neighbors gather, and cups of hot ale pass from hand to hand. For one night, the dark season is transformed by firelight, a beacon of hope in the frozen world. The practice of lighting great fires at midwinter stretches back to ancient times. The Yule log, burned in Germanic and Scandinavian traditions, was a massive piece of wood placed in the hearth to last for days, sometimes even 12 nights. It symbolized not only warmth, but continuity. Its steady flame a promise that the sun would return. Ashes from the Yule log were often kept, believed to protect homes and fields from misfortune. In this way, fire was not only heat but magic, binding the household to the cycles of the earth. In Rome, the festival of Saturnalia marked midwinter with feasting, revelry, and light. Candles burned in homes and temples, symbolizing the sun and the promise of longer days. Masters and slaves dined together, gifts were exchanged, and streets filled with merriment. Though the air outside was cold, the fires of Saturnalia created warmth through community and inversion of daily life. Later, some of these traditions would echo in Christmas celebrations, where fire, light, and feast remained central. In Celtic lands, fire festivals were woven into the seasonal calendar. Samhain in autumn marked the descent into winter, but Yule and Imbolc carried fire into the darkest months. Bonfires lit on hillsides were visible for miles, guiding communities through long nights. People carried torches, lit candles, and watched flames leap into the winter sky. The fire symbolized protection against spirits, but also the endurance of life in a season that seemed so barren. Fires were not always massive or public. In many homes, families celebrated with smaller rituals. Candles placed in windows, hearths stoked with special logs, or lamps filled with fragrant oils all carried symbolic weight. These lights marked hope, guidance, and comfort. In Jewish tradition, the festival of Hanukkah became a celebration of light in winter, with candles kindled each night to recall a miracle. The glow of the menorah spread warmth and connection, echoing the same universal theme, light against darkness. Communal fires also tied into agricultural hopes. In some European traditions, villagers carried torches through orchards and fields, a practice called wassailing. They sang to the trees, poured cider at their roots, and lit fires to encourage fertility for the coming spring. In this way, winter festivals looked forward, using fire not only to warm the present, but to ensure abundance in the future. Music and storytelling thrived around festival fires. Long before printed books or theater stages, the hearth and bonfire were the stages of the world. Bards, poets, and elders recited tales of gods, heroes, and ancestors. Songs lifted voices together, the rhythm of drums or clapping hands echoing in the night. The fire became the center not only of warmth, but of culture, carrying traditions across generations. Food, too, was central to these gatherings. In many cultures, winter festivals involved the slaughter of animals that could not be kept alive through the season. This turned necessity into feast. Roasted meats, spiced pies, and hearty stews filled tables. Ale and wine flowed, sometimes heated with spices. For peasants who often lived on thin porridge and bread, these feasts were a rare taste of richness. For nobles, they were opportunities to display wealth and generosity. Fire cooked the meals, but it also symbolized the abundance that feasting represented in the cold season. Different cultures expressed these themes uniquely. In Japan, the winter solstice Toji was marked with hot baths infused with yuzu citrus, symbolizing cleansing and renewal, and fires that banished illness. In India, the festival of Lori celebrated the end of winter with bonfires, dancing, and songs, thanking the gods for harvest and sun. Across the world, winter festivals revolved around the same core: light, warmth, and communal joy. The psychological effect of fire in winter was profound. To see flames leap into the night sky was to feel, even briefly, that darkness had been defeated. To gather around a hearth with neighbors was to push away isolation. Fires drew people together, not only in physical warmth, but in shared spirit. Children remembered the glow of festivals long after, and adults carried comfort in knowing that even the longest night was filled with light. These rituals also reinforced social bonds. In villages, bonfires reminded everyone that survival was collective. In noble courts, feasts displayed the power and generosity of rulers, assuring subjects that they would endure the season together. In religious traditions, fire carried symbolic weight, representing divine presence and the promise of renewal. In every context, the blaze of winter festivals meant more than heat, it meant connection. Even today, we preserve these traditions. Christmas trees are strung with lights. Hanukkah candles glow in windows, and fireworks brighten New Year skies. Winter markets serve mulled wine by fire pits, and communities gather for solstice celebrations around bonfires. Though our homes are heated and our nights lit by electricity, the human desire for fire in the dark remains unchanged. Winter festivals and fires show us something timeless, that warmth is not only physical but emotional, not only survival but joy. The flames lit in midwinter were declarations of hope, symbols that life would continue, that spring would return. In the darkest season, fire was not merely fuel but meaning, a reminder that even when cold and night seemed endless, light could be made, shared, and celebrated. Winter was not a season of rest. For most of history, daily labor could not simply stop because the air was icy or the fields frozen. People still had animals to feed, firewood to chop, water to fetch, and paths to clear. Soldiers still marched, farmers still tended to urgent tasks, and craftsmen still worked at their trades. The cold was not a reason to pause life, but an obstacle to overcome and work in winter became a test of both endurance and ingenuity. Imagine a medieval farmer rising before dawn in January. The sky outside is dark, the air inside his cottage so cold that his breath clouds before his face. The hearth fire, left smoldering overnight, is coaxed back to life, but the warmth it gives is meager. He pulls on woolen hose and a rough cloak, still stiff from yesterday's frost, and steps outside. The ground crunches beneath his boots, and the icy wind bites at his cheeks. Yet the animals must be tended, and the work cannot wait. For peasants, much of winter labor centered on livestock. In colder regions, fields lay dormant, but animals still required daily care. Cows had to be milked, sheep fed, and horses exercised even in snow. Children carried buckets of icy water, their hands numbed by the weight and chill. Families trudged to barns each morning, shoveling snow to clear paths and breaking ice to ensure animals could drink. The warmth of the barn, filled with the breath and bodies of animals, was a welcome relief, though chores inside were still backbreaking. Wood cutting was another essential task. Fires had to be fed constantly, and wood supplies dwindled quickly in long winters. Men and older boys spent hours felling trees, chopping logs, and carrying bundles back to homes. In forests, the sound of axes echoed even on the coldest days, a rhythm of survival as much as labor. For many families, the stack of firewood outside was as valuable as food stores, a visible measure of how much warmth they could expect in the months ahead. Water was equally vital. In regions where wells or rivers froze, families had to break ice daily to collect water. This was grueling work, often performed by women and children. Buckets froze to hands, ropes stiffened, and water sloshed into clothing, chilling to the bone. Yet without water, no household could cook, clean, or care for animals. Even in the harshest storms, the daily trek for water could not be avoided. For craftsmen and artisans, winter brought its own challenges. Blacksmiths still worked at their forges, though fires in their shops provided some warmth. Bakers continued to rise early, their ovens glowing as the village woke. Weavers, tailors, and cobblers kept busy, often repairing winter clothing or creating new garments. These trades provided not only income, but survival for others, ensuring that communities remained clothed and fed. Yet the cold seeped into workshops, numbing fingers and stiffening tools. Work slowed, but it never ceased. In towns and cities, winter created opportunities for certain trades. Ice and snow had to be cleared from streets, and markets still bustled, though with fewer stalls. Vendors wrapped themselves in layers, selling roasted chestnuts, hot drinks, or preserved goods to those who braved the cold. For carters and porters, icy roads made hauling goods dangerous but necessary. Work in the cold was harder, slower, and more dangerous, but life could not pause until spring. Travel and transport were especially difficult. Frozen rivers sometimes became temporary roads, used for sledges or carts. But icy paths were treacherous, and storms stranded travelers in dangerous conditions. Merchants and messengers often risked frostbite, huddling in cloaks and stopping at inns or monasteries for warmth. For armies, winter campaigns were notorious. Soldiers marched through snow, slept in tents or makeshift shelters, and endured hunger when supplies froze or spoiled. The retreat of Napoleon's army from Russia in 1812, for example, is one of the most famous stories of men overwhelmed not only by an enemy, but by winter itself. Children, too, worked in winter. They carried fuel, fetched water, fed chickens, and helped with weaving or mending indoors. Even their games often doubled as labor, collecting wood or breaking ice while playing. For them, winter was less a season of rest and more a continuation of duty, though with moments of joy carved out in snowball fights or sliding on frozen ponds. Religion often intertwined with winter work. Many communities prayed for strength to endure labor in the cold, blessing tools or animals before the season began. Festivals like Christmas or midwinter feasts provided breaks, moments of warmth and rest amid long stretches of toil. Songs sung during work often carried religious or folk themes, giving rhythm to shoveling snow, chopping wood, or spinning wool by the fire. Work in winter also revealed sharp divisions between classes. Wealthy landowners often retreated to warmer chambers, attended by servants who bore the brunt of the cold. Servants fetched wood, stoked fires, and carried water, often enduring the harshest conditions, while their masters enjoyed relative comfort. For peasants, there was no escape. Work continued daily, regardless of frost or storm. The contrast highlighted the privileges of wealth, but also the resilience of those who labored with little but necessity to drive them on. Despite the hardship, winter work carried its own rewards. A barn, warm with animals, offered moments of peace. The shared labor of chopping wood or hauling water bonded families and neighbors. The glow of a forge, the smell of baking bread, or the hum of spinning wheels filled cold days with productivity and purpose. Work did more than sustain life. It created structure, a rhythm to the season. Even today, echoes of this labor remain. Farmers still rise early in winter to tend animals. Loggers still cut wood in snow, and workers in cities still clear streets and deliver goods despite icy winds. Though machines and modern heating have eased much of the struggle, the memory of labor in the cold lives on in traditions, sayings, and stories. Work in winter was never optional. It was survival. To endure the season meant not only eating and resting, but rising each day to chop wood, haul water, care for animals, mend clothing, and maintain homes. It was a season of toil, as much as of endurance, and in its steady rhythm lay the strength of generations who faced winter without pause. Winter was a shared experience. Snow fell on both cottages and castles. Frost touched peasants and nobles alike. Yet the way people endured the cold revealed stark differences between rich and poor, between those with resources and those without. In many ways, winter acted as a mirror, reflecting the social divides of the time. Warmth itself became a form of privilege, and cold a reminder of inequality. Imagine two homes in the same village on a bitter January night. In one, a peasant family huddles together in a smoky one-room cottage. The roof is patched with straw, the windows shuttered with wood. A single fire burns low, carefully rationed so that wood will last the week. Children share a straw mattress, covered by one worn blanket. Parents wrap themselves in cloaks, hoping their body heat will be enough. The cold presses in, relentless, every draft a reminder of their vulnerability. Across the village, a wealthy merchant's home tells a different story. A wide hearth roars with logs cut and stacked by hired hands. The walls are hung with tapestries, blocking drafts, and feather beds await upstairs, piled with furs and quilts. Servants bustle, carrying heated stones to warm the sheets, pouring cups of mulled wine to ease the chill. Though the cold still lingers in the corners, the family feels secure. Their wealth has purchased insulation against winter's grip. This contrast was repeated across centuries and cultures. For the poor, warmth was fragile, dependent on labor and luck. A failed harvest meant not only hunger, but the inability to fuel fires. A shortage of wood or coal left families shivering, their survival tied to the mercy of neighbors or charity. For the wealthy, warmth could be purchased wood by the cartload, furs by the dozen, servants by the household. Even in the same season, winter felt like two different worlds. Fuel was one of the clearest markers of division. Peasants gathered fallen branches, dug peat from bogs, or burned dried dung when wood was scarce. Their fires smoked and sputtered, giving little heat. Nobles, in contrast, burned oak and beech in abundance, their flames steady and bright. In cities, coal became a prized resource from the late Middle Ages onward. The poor often could not afford it, while the wealthy built chimneys and stoves that allowed coal to heat entire homes. The crackle of a fire was not just sound, it was status. Clothing told the same story. Peasants layered patched wool, coarse linen, and scraps of fur. Their garments were practical but heavy, often damp, and rarely fully warm. Nobles and merchants wore velvets lined with sable, cloaks trimmed with ermine, and gloves made of soft leather. The furs that kept a lord's shoulders warm were unimaginable luxuries to a farm laborer shivering in a threadbare cloak. Laws in some regions even restricted certain furs to the nobility, making warmth itself a guarded privilege. Bedding revealed further divides. For peasants, straw mattresses and one or two thin blankets were the norm. Families often shared one bed, pressed close to conserve heat. The wealthy sank into feather beds, wrapped in fur coverlets and layered quilts. Servants might even warm the bed with heated pans before their masters lay down. Sleep in winter could mean shivering and waking often for one class, and cocoon-like comfort for another. Food, too, played its part. Rich diets of roasted meat, spiced wine, and hearty pies gave nobles both warmth and energy. Spices like cinnamon and ginger were believed to warm the body, but they were expensive, imported luxuries. For peasants, meals were often thin porridge, bread, or a watery stew with few scraps of meat. Without rich fuel for their bodies, they faced the cold with fewer defenses. Warm drinks, so common in noble halls, were rare luxuries in peasant cottages. Even architecture divided warmth. Stone castles and manor houses might have been drafty, but their sheer size allowed for multiple fireplaces, tapestries, and thick walls that retained heat once warmed. Peasant cottages, by contrast, were small, with smoke-filled rooms and little insulation. While nobles could retreat into private chambers or surround themselves with servants, peasants had no escape. The cold was a constant, woven into daily life. Servants themselves embodied this divide. Their labor kept noble homes warm, chopping wood, stoking fires, carrying coals, mending clothes. Yet their own quarters were often cold, their beds simple, their meals plain. They endured winter on behalf of their masters, ensuring luxury for others while lacking it themselves. The contrast between the warmth they created and the chill they endured was a stark reminder of social hierarchy. In cities, the divide was just as sharp. Wealthy merchants lived in houses with glazed windows and multiple rooms, while the poor crowded into tenements with little heat or light. Chimneys and coal stoves became symbols of prosperity, while the poor relied on smoky braziers or shared fires in courtyards. Winter exposed inequality as visibly as hunger or illness, turning the ability to keep warm into a marker of class. Folklore and literature often reflected these divides. Stories contrasted the feast halls of nobles with the meager cottages of peasants, highlighting both the abundance of one and the hardship of the other. Winter itself became a metaphor for inequality, a force that touched all but punished some far more than others. Charity sometimes softened the divide. Monasteries distributed firewood or warm meals to the poor, especially during harsh winters. Wealthy patrons donated cloaks or blankets, often as acts of piety. In some towns, communal fires were lit in public squares, where anyone could gather for warmth. Yet such gestures were temporary, and the underlying divide remained. For most of the poor, winter was endured, not softened. The psychological experience of cold also divided classes. For nobles, a cold night might mean discomfort, an annoyance to be banished with more logs or furs. For peasants, cold meant the fear of illness, of hunger, of death. Winter claimed the weakest first, the elderly, children, and the poor. The rich, though not untouched, had greater protection. Warmth became a shield of privilege, separating those who suffered most from those who could resist. Yet winter was also a reminder that wealth had limits. Even in Versailles or Moscow's palaces, drafts lingered, breath misted in the air, and fingers grew stiff with frost. Fireplaces could not heat vast halls fully, and nobles wrapped themselves in furs indoors. Winter humbled all, though it punished the poor most severely. Even today, echoes remain. Heating bills, insulated homes, and access to warm clothing continue to divide societies. Warmth is still tied to wealth, comfort to privilege. The same truth that shaped winters in medieval villages and Renaissance palaces remains. The cold reveals inequality. For our ancestors, the cold was more than weather. It was a test of survival, one that revealed who had resources and who did not. It drew lines between classes, between comfort and hardship, between life and death. In this way, winter was not only a season, but a social divider, one that illuminated, as starkly as snow on dark earth, the differences between rich and poor. For thousands of years, warmth in winter came from fire, whether it was a smoky hearth, a blazing bonfire, or a few glowing embers tucked beneath ash. People huddled close, slept under heavy furs, and used heated stones or shared beds to survive the season. But gradually, over centuries, new ideas and inventions reshaped how humanity battled the cold. The transition to modern heating was not sudden, but step by step as homes, technology, and society evolved together. Imagine an early medieval cottage. One room, a central hearth, smoke drifting up through a hole in the roof. The fire burned constantly, because to let it die meant struggle to reignite it. The heat was uneven, strongest at the hearth, fading into the corners. By contrast, step into a 19th century home in Europe or America. A cast iron stove glows steadily in the parlor, fueled by coal. The fire is contained, efficient, and controlled by dampers. The air is warmer, the smoke directed safely up a chimney. This difference between open fire and stove captures the essence of the transformation. The first great leap came with the chimney. Before chimneys became widespread in Europe, most homes relied on central hearths or side fires that filled rooms with smoke. Chimneys, appearing in the 12th and 13th centuries and spreading widely by the late Middle Ages, changed everything. Smoke was drawn upward and out, making interiors cleaner and healthier. Fires could burn hotter because drafts pulled air efficiently through the flames. Rooms could now have fireplaces along the walls rather than only central hearths, allowing multiple fires in one home. Warmth became more flexible and living spaces more comfortable. The next advance was the stove. In Eastern Europe and Russia, masonry stoves, massive structures of brick or tile dominated households for centuries. Unlike open fireplaces, they absorbed the heat of a fire and released it slowly over time. A single firing in the morning could warm a room for hours, even into the next day. Families slept on platforms built into or above these stoves, cocooned in radiant warmth. In northern climates, these stoves were lifesavers, reducing the need for constant fuel and creating steady, reliable heat. In Germany, tile stoves, known as Kachelophens, became common in the Renaissance. Beautifully decorated with glazed ceramic tiles, they were as much art as utility. Their surfaces radiated gentle warmth, filling rooms evenly rather than blasting heat in one direction. These stoves spread across Europe, influencing heating traditions for centuries. Meanwhile, in Western Europe and North America, cast iron stoves appeared in the 18th and 19th centuries. Smaller and more portable than masonry stoves, they became central features of middle-class homes. Fueled first by wood, then by coal, they transformed heating. Families could heat specific rooms, cook efficiently, and conserve fuel. Stoves were safer than open fires, though still requiring vigilance. Their popularity grew rapidly, marking a turning point in domestic life. Coal itself marked another transition. While wood had long been the dominant fuel, forests near cities could not always supply the growing demand. Coal, mined in Britain, Germany, and later America, provided abundant energy. Its heat was intense and long-lasting, perfect for stoves and furnaces. By the 19th century, coal fires lit the industrial world, filling factories, locomotives, and homes alike. Streets grew smoky, but indoors, families enjoyed warmth on a scale their ancestors could scarcely imagine. The Industrial Revolution accelerated these changes. As cities expanded, row houses and tenements were built with fireplaces or stoves in nearly every unit. Wealthier homes developed central hearths connected by flues, heating multiple rooms at once. In the grandest estates, entire systems of ducts and flues distributed warm air throughout buildings, an early precursor to central heating. Warmth became not only survival, but expectation. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, new systems began to emerge: steam heat and hot water radiators. Boilers heated water or produced steam, which traveled through pipes to radiators in every room. Suddenly, warmth was not confined to the parlor or kitchen. Whole houses could be heated at once, evenly and reliably. The hiss of steam radiators and the clank of pipes became familiar sounds in urban apartments and suburban homes alike. Central heating was revolutionary, not only for comfort, but for daily life. No longer did families need to cluster constantly around a single fire. Children could play in bedrooms without freezing, and servants no longer had to stoke multiple fires in every room. Work and leisure spread throughout the home, transforming domestic patterns. Electricity introduced yet another leap. By the early 20th century, electric heaters appeared, small and portable, glowing with wires that turned current into warmth. Though less efficient for entire homes, they provided supplemental heat where needed. Gas heating followed, with furnaces connected to ducts that distributed warm air throughout houses. By the mid-20th century, forced air systems became common, combining heating with ventilation and, eventually, cooling. For the first time, modern households could control temperature year-round, creating an environment almost untouched by the seasons outside. The psychological shift was immense. For centuries, winter had been a season of endurance, a test of resilience. Fires required constant tending. Wood had to be chopped, fuel gathered, smoke endured. By the modern era, a single switch, knob, or thermostat could summon warmth instantly. Winter no longer dictated the rhythm of life in the same way. Work continued smoothly, sleep was undisturbed by cold, and children grew up in homes where icy drafts were unknown. Yet even as modern heating spread, echoes of the past remained. Fireplaces continued to hold symbolic power. Families still gathered around them, even when central heating made them unnecessary. The crackle of logs, the dance of flames, and the glow of embers connected people to their ancestors, who had once relied on fire as their only defense. Fireplaces became decorative, but their presence spoke to deep memory. Warmth is heart of the home. Cultural differences persisted too. In Russia, masonry stoves remained beloved for their efficiency and tradition. In Japan, the kotatsu, a heated table draped with blankets, continues to be a winter staple, blending ancient and modern comfort. In parts of the Middle East, braziers are still used in winter, carrying centuries-old customs into the present. Modern heating, for all its convenience, also created new challenges. Coal fires blackened cities, contributing to pollution. Gas and oil heating tied warmth to new industries, reshaping economies and environments. Today, questions of energy efficiency, sustainability, and climate change echo back to the oldest concerns: how to keep warm in winter, and at what cost. Still, the story of heating is ultimately one of progress. From smoky hearths to clean radiators, from wood fires to thermostats, humanity has steadily refined its control over winter. Warmth is no longer only about survival, but about comfort, convenience, and even luxury. What was once the nightly struggle to bank embers is now the simple press of a button. And yet the essence remains. Warmth is still cherished, still symbolic of home, family, and security. Whether through ancient fires or modern furnaces, the human desire to push back winter's cold has not changed. The transition to modern heating is not just a technological journey. It is a story of how people, across time, reshaped their relationship with the season itself, turning winter from an adversary into a companion, endured with light, comfort, and warmth. And so, we come to the end of our long journey through winter's past. We have wandered from smoky hearths to glowing stoves, from straw mattresses to feather beds, from icy cottages to glittering palaces, and from shared beds to central heating. Each chapter has shown us something remarkable: the countless ways people have faced the cold, endured the darkness, and found warmth where it seemed scarce. Winter has always been a test of human resilience. For peasants, it was nights huddled under thin blankets, sharing body heat and hope. For nobles, it was fires in vast halls, braziers glowing, and furs piled high. For nomads, it was felt yurts and igloos, shelters carried across frozen lands. And for all, it was a season not only of hardship, but of creativity, community, and determination. What unites these stories is the truth that warmth is more than fire or clothing. It is also the presence of others. Families gathered close, neighbors shared meals, and communities lit great fires together. Even today, when central heating keeps our homes steady and warm, we still gather by fires, share hot drinks, and light candles in the dark months. The instinct remains, linking us to our ancestors across centuries. As you drift now into sleep, let your mind rest on these images: the quiet crackle of a Yule log, the glow of mulled wine in a cup, the softness of furs across a bed, the laughter of villagers around a bonfire. Each is a reminder that warmth is not only physical but emotional, a timeless comfort that carries us through the darkest nights. If you've enjoyed this journey through history, I invite you to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story. And please, share in the comments what eras or topics most interest you, or when you like to listen, whether at bedtime, on quiet evenings, or in the middle of restless nights. Your thoughts help guide future journeys, and your presence helps this community grow. Thank you for listening, And may your night be peaceful, your rest deep, and your dreams warmed by the stories of the past.